Chapter 60. 5 pieces of sword fell into one sword. The rain in the courtyard of the Chow mansion was inexplicably more scorching, as if there was an invisible sun in the night sky. The rainwater near the rain-savoring building began to turn into white mist at a high speed. It seemed to be one sword, but in fact it contained countless sharp swords in the world. Chao Xiaoshu's powerful spirit followed his eyes to the rain-savoring building, and made the thin cyan steel sword stab at the copper bowl at a high speed. Then it retracted like lightning and stabbed again at a higher speed. In an instant, it stabbed hundreds of times. The sword attacks, which were many times faster than a woodpecker pecking a tree, fell horribly on the center of the copper bowl, making a tuck-tuck-tuck-tuck sound. Because the frequency of the sword stabbing was too high, the sound could not be heard at all. So people in the courtyard could only hear a prolonged, muffled sound. "He can't make it. Kill him at close range." The leader of the Tang army looked at Chao Xiaoshu sitting cross-legged in the rain and noticed that his face was getting paler and paler. At this time, these sergeants no longer needed any discipline or glory to support their actions. They knew clearly that they had to kill Chao Xiaoshu immediately. Otherwise, if the thin sword broke the copper bowl and killed the Sadhu of Yueluan Kingdom, they would have no chance to kill him. More precisely, they would all die. The dense rain of crossbows was shot again, and more than a dozen swift and fierce figures attacked again. This time, the elites of the Tang army appeared to be more resolute and valiant, because they were forced by despair. But they still couldn't get close to Chao Xiaoshu and kill this great sword master, because there was a teenager standing in front of Chao Xiaoshu. Ning Ke kept moving on the bluestone slabs that had accumulated rain. He was not agile and appeared to be particularly heavy. Every time he stepped on the ground, there would be a splash of water. And every time there was a splash, his blade would kill an elite soldier of the Tang army. Chao Xiaoshu sat cross-legged in the storm, which was equivalent to entrusting his life to him. Therefore, he had been guarding Chao Xiaoshu from the beginning to the end, turning himself and the padao in his hand into the net of death from before. Bending his right elbow, the blade sank and cut off the knee of a Tang soldier. Ning Ke did not have time to pull out his blade. He lifted his left foot and bounced out like a flying stone, kicking hard on the pubic region of another Tang soldier. Then he turned his hands that were holding the slender hilt, and the blade rose from bottom to top, cutting open the abdomen of the third Tang soldier. Another figure pounced on him valiantly. Half squatting on the ground, he twisted his waist and took advantage of the momentum to slash with his saber. The saber flashed and cut off a few legs. His black mask had long been soaked by the rain and his breath was wet. But his eyes and brows were as calm as usual, even a little numb. His movements were extremely simple, but the lethality was extremely amazing. Under his saber, those brave elites of the Tang army were chopped down like pieces of wood. No matter how dense the rain of arrows was or how cold the saber light was, he always stood in front of Chao Xiaoshu and did not retreat a single step. Even if his shoulder was scratched by a crossbow arrow, even if the side of his leg was cut by the blade, he did not retreat even half a step. A very unpleasant loud sound came from inside the rain-savoring building, like an iron pot being smashed by a brick. The copper bowl in front of the Sadhu was finally broken by the thousands of swords. The bamboo hat on the Sadhu's head cracked along with the copper bowl, and a trace of resoluteness flashed across his dark face. His madra changed again, and the prayer beads that had been guarding around his body stopped rotating and suddenly turned into a black dragon snake. With a whooshing sound, it entangled the thin cyan steel sword that was about to stab his face, making the sword's momentum pause. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the building in silence, and his right hand that was exposed outside his sleeve stroked the water beside him. He scooped up a handful of rainwater and sprinkled it in front of him. The thin cyan steel sword in the rain-savoring building suddenly began to buzz and vibrate along with his movement, like a real dragon about to break through the clouds, forcibly rushing forward. Raindrops the size of soybeans fell on the bluestone floor, making a light pitter-patter. New branches that were broken by the wind also made a light pitter-patter. There was also a light pitter-patter in the rain-savoring building. The ironwood prayer beads that trapped the cyan steel sword scattered everywhere. The sadhu smiled bitterly and closed his eyes. The cyan steel sword whistled through the more than 100 ironwood prayer beads in the air inside the building and deeply pierced his dark eyebrows. Blood slowly seeped out and his bitter smile froze. At the main gate of the Chow mansion, Ning Ke looked at the enemies not far away and slowly pulled out the padao from the chest of a Tang soldier. The scattered prayer beads hit the beams and the wall, and then fell on the wooden floor. The surviving elites of the Tang army looked at the smiling middle-aged man sitting cross-legged in the rainstorm and the masked lad standing silently in the rainstorm with a knife in his hand. Their hearts were full of despair. The sound of a carriage came from the alley. Chao Xiaoshu slowly raised his eyebrows. In the southern city of Chang'an, the most profitable star-picking casino in the hands of Lord Meng had become a ruin. The smashed gambling tools were thrown all over the street. The chips that usually represented money were soaked in the dirty and smelly rainwater, and no one dared to pick them up. On the roadside, there were women and children crying and shouting around a dozen stewards and guards of the casino who had their legs broken. However, no one dared to use words to curse those damned murderers. They didn't even dare to show any resentment. More than 40 gang members of the Spring Breeze Pavilion in cyan clothes and cyan boots stood around indifferently. They were maintaining order and also announcing to all the people in Southern City that they had entered. At the forefront of the crowd, Qi Laosi took a cyan handkerchief from his subordinate and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. There was no complacency or pride on his face. Instead, he looked a little anxious because he knew that although the Fish Dragon gang took advantage of the situation to occupy a lot of territory tonight, his elder brother was facing the ambush of those powerful enemies alone in the street of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. There was no one around him. The same story and similar scenes happened in all the squares of Chang'an tonight. The pawnshop and brothel controlled by Uncle Cat were smashed by a group of fierce men in cyan clothes. Another group of men in cyan clothes controlled the 3 mistresses of Junjie and directly flattened the 3 luxurious small courtyards. The chilly spring rain had been pattering all the time, and there were signs that it was getting heavier. Tonight, all the major forces in the underground world of Chang'an had poured into the eastern city with the help of the government, launching an attack on Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, who had led the Jianghu of Chang'an for many years. However, no one had expected that the legendary figure of the Dark Knight would use himself as bait and take advantage of the time when the forces in Southern City and Western City were all drawn away to send all the brothers in the gang to control the overall situation. After tonight, as long as Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion was still alive, he and his brothers could completely control Chang'an at night. However, tonight Chao Xiaoshu was alone. Those brothers who had bathed in blood with him for many years were not here. Could he survive? In the heavily guarded encampment of the Yulin Royal Guards in the northern city of Chang'an, Deputy General Chao Ning of the Yulin Royal Guards looked at the 2 captains in front of him whose hands were tied behind their backs and sneered. Chang Siwei? Should I address you as Chang San? Fei Jingwei, should I address you as Fei Lu? I really didn't expect that the 2 leaders of the Fish Dragon gang were hiding in the Yulin Royal Guard. Chang Siwei was a gentle middle-aged man. He looked at his direct superior and said with a smile, "Do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know? There are many people in the military camp who earn outside money. As far as I know, you seem to have some shares in Lord Meng and Uncle Mao." Fei Jingwei remained silent and just stared at Chao Ning's face coldly, as if he wanted to stare at this old face. Chao Ning picked up the teacup and drank 2 mouthfuls. He said, "What's the point of saying these things now? It's just a battle of words. You 2 are just insignificant captains. If it weren't for the sake of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, why would I talk nonsense with you? But don't think that you can put on airs in front of me with the support of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. I only need to give an order and you can't leave the camp. As long as you dare to leave the camp, I can directly behead you without asking for an imperial order. And if you can't leave the camp, the Spring Breeze Pavilion will die tonight. The Spring Breeze Pavilion will die. He slowly put down the teacup and said indifferently, "So you are useless." Chang Siwei said with a smile, "Many people in this world have died, but my elder brother will not die. There has never been an unkillable person in this world." Chao Ning stared at his face and said coldly, "So many nobles of the Tang Empire want to show respect to the Spring Breeze Pavilion, but he refused. I'd like to see how he, a Jianghu character of Chang'an, can turn the tables when so many nobles want him dead." As soon as he finished speaking, the curtain of the door was lifted. The chilly night wind with a few raindrops drifted in. Chao Ning was slightly stunned and was about to scold him angrily. Suddenly, his expression became stiff. He subconsciously stood up and saluted. "Eunuch Lin, it's so late. Why did you come here? What are you doing?" The short and stout Eunuch Lin looked at him with a smile and said, "Nothing else. I heard that the Yulin Royal Guards have raised the alert level at the forbidden gate of the palace tonight. I came here to ask what happened." Then, Eunuch Lin turned to look at the two captains whose hands were tied. He frowned and asked, "What's going on?" In the camp of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion, torches were shining on the horse field. Even the continuous rain could not extinguish the torches. Chu Ren, the deputy commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion, stared angrily at the square-faced man on the horse and roared, "Lu Si, you bastard! Closing the camp is a military order issued by the military ministry. If you dare to break into the camp, I dare to cut off your head." The square-faced man was extremely tall and strong. Even though he was sitting on the horse, his feet seemed to be hanging to the ground. Listening to the rebuke of the deputy commander, his face was still expressionless. He slowly stroked the iron spear beside the saddle with his right hand and looked through the night rain at a place called the Spring Breeze Pavilion in the eastern city of Chang'an. His name was Lu Si, ranked 5th in the Fish Dragon Gang. Years ago, when old Chao of the Spring Breeze Pavilion forcibly established a Jianghu in Chang'an city with only a sword, it was this person who stood beside Chao Shaoshu. Tonight, he could not stand beside his elder brother to block the arrows for him. He could only silently hope that the lad that his elder brother had his eyes on could handle the matter well. Lu Si looked back at the deputy commander Chu Ren, who was standing at the entrance of the camp. Looking at the densely packed soldiers, he said expressionlessly, "Commander, I dare not disobey the military order and break into the camp. But since you personally tore apart the promotion order 10 years ago, I have always wanted to fight with you. I don't know if you dare or not." In a remote and quiet room in the imperial palace, a voice with a strong Hebei accent sounded, "Old Chen, you have been in the bodyguard office for a long time. Although you have already left your post many years ago, you have been an imperial bodyguard for a day. That means you will be an imperial bodyguard for the rest of your life. You are the face of the emperor. How can you meddle in the Jianghu's affairs? I know you are good friends with old Chao, but tonight you should be very clear that this is a plan made by that master himself. Who dares to stop him?" In the rain, the carriage slowly stopped. It was only 10 feet away from the Spring Breeze Pavilion Chao's house. Chapter 61. The distance was neither too far nor too close. For ordinary people, this number meant nothing, but for cultivators in the see-through state, this distance represented danger and even death. Because no matter if it was a sword master, a talisman master or a psyche master, as long as they stepped into the see-through state, they could attack any target within 30 feet. The majestic spring rain fell on the carriage and on the body of the burly coachman on the shaft. The curtain of the carriage was occasionally lifted by the wind. Only a corner of the simple gown could be seen, but the person inside could not be clearly seen. The owner of the simple gown was an old man with a simple face. His flowery eyebrows drooped down and his face was full of wrinkles, as bitter and miserable as the old roots of Coptis. His name was Shao Kuyu, a strong man supported by the military of the Tang Empire. He had entered the see-through state as early as 20 years ago. A few days ago, because of tonight's purge plan, he was secretly recalled to the capital from Yangguan in the south by the military ministry. Outside the carriage, the wind and rain were howling, but inside the carriage, Shao Kuyu seemed oblivious. His skinny hands were trembling slightly on his knees, and his thumbs were constantly pinching the 4 horizontal lines on his index and middle fingers, like withered twigs incessantly tapping on the dry, yellow earth. His eyes were closed. In front of his face was the thick curtain of the carriage, but he only needed to pinch his fingers lightly to accurately see the scene outside the front door of the Chao mansion, looking at Chao Xiaoshu sitting cross-legged in the heavy rain. The rain above the spring breeze pavilion was disturbed by some invisible force and began to tilt. Several waves that no one could see or even perceive began to condense in the qi of heaven and earth. Chao Xiaoshu, who was sitting in the rainstorm, pursed his lips. For the first time in tonight's battle, the middle-aged man's pale and handsome eyes showed a solemn expression. He had to concentrate all his energy to deal with the Psyche Master in the mysterious horse carriage. Therefore, he closed his eyes and no longer looked at the dozens of Tang elites in front of him. His right hand, which was exposed outside his sleeve, whizzed and hit the water beside him. The muddy rainwater splashed up. As his palm hit the rain heavily, the thin cyan steel sword deeply pierced between the eyebrows of the sadhu and the rain-savoring building retreated at a high speed. It turned around in the rainy sky like lightning, whistling mournfully and turning into a flowing light at a speed never shown before. It instantly flew over the courtyard wall and stabbed the carriage in the rain. In the quiet rain, an extremely indifferent word rang out in the carriage, "Tut." The rainbow-like green steel sword seemed to have been struck by the power contained in the word, and also seemed to have been bound by strands of invisible yuan qi in the rain. Just as it flew over the courtyard wall, it suddenly paused. Then, like a kite with its string cut, it miserably flew diagonally into the opposite wall of the alley, falling to the ground along with the rain. The sound in the carriage in the rain seemed to have transcended the scope of space and time. It came from 100 feet away, but at the same time, it sounded like thunder in Chao Xiaoshu's ears, an ocean of qi. Dong, 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 dong. Chao Xiaoshu felt as if his heart was grasped by an invisible hand and began to beat violently like a war drum. He instantly lost control of the flying sword. He knew that if he did not respond, the next moment, the war drum would be cracked by the heavy beating and his heart would be crushed by the person in the carriage. The person in the carriage in the rain, where on earth did they find such a great Psyche Master? Chao Xiaoshu's thin lips tightened. He raised his right hand as fast as lightning and hit his chest 3 times. The rainwater shook off his green robe. He forcibly sealed his ocean of qi, but his body had already drifted diagonally off the ground with the help of the previous hit. He floated out of the gate of his house and into the street covered in rain. With both palms heavily on the ground, Chao Xiaoshu felt the omnipresent yuan qi fluctuation in the air, and felt the numerous cold qi threads weaving a net around his body. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. He walked toward the carriage in the rain. His face became paler and paler, but his eyes became brighter and brighter. His usual calmness had long been replaced by indifference and determination. Even though the yuan qi fluctuation in the alley would cause great harm to his body and spirit with every step he took, and even though the powerful Psyche Master's attack on his ocean of qi would become sharper with every step he took, he still insisted on moving forward, because he had to get close to the carriage. At the moment when Chao Xiaoshu's heart began to beat violently, Ning Ke felt something strange. In the sound of the rain, he heard the sound like a war drum. He knew that the terrible sound came from within Chao Xiaoshu's body. He used his psyche power to control the primordial chi of heaven and earth to directly attack the enemy's internal organs. This method seemed so magical and irresistible. Standing in the rain, his body began to stiffen. His hand holding the hilt suddenly felt very cold. He knew that the really terrible enemy had finally appeared. Chao Xiaoshu walked toward the carriage in the rain without giving any instructions to Ning Quebec. Because his mind was completely focused on fighting against the enemy in the carriage, he had no time to tell Ning Ke what to do. Ning Ke had seen the elder Liu Qingchen's moves. He knew how terrible the existence of a psyche master was, so he knew that at this moment, he had to suppress all the fear in his heart. He was very clear that no matter how strong a psyche master was, his relatively fragile body was his fatal weakness. If he wanted Chao Xiaoshu to live, and if he wanted to live, then he had to think of every way possible to hurt the body of the person in the carriage and interrupt his meditation. There was a heavy curtain of rain between the front door of the Chao mansion and the carriage, and there was a distance of 100 feet between them. A psyche master could control the chi of heaven and earth to ignore this distance and any restrictions of time and space, and directly attack the enemy. But he was just an ordinary person. How should he choose to interrupt the enemy's meditation? His right foot stepped heavily on the bluestone floor, and a circle of slightly muddy water appeared around the sole of his foot. Relying on the huge recoil, Ning Ke's body was like a fallen leaf swept up by the wind, and with a swoosh, he flew out of the front door of the Chao mansion and leaped into the air. He was still in the air when, with a clang, he accurately inserted the padao in his right hand back into the scabbard behind him. Then he grabbed the arrow in the quiver and turned his left elbow. The boxwood bough made a circle in the rain and appeared in front of him. Floating in the rain, he suddenly pulled open the boxwood bough, tightened the tendons, and released it again. 4 arrows were shot from the bowstring. 4 arrows shot toward the carriage in the rain like lightning. When Ning Ke's feet stepped into the puddle of water and his body landed on the ground again, the 4 arrows had already passed by Chao Xiaoshu's body. One could imagine how amazing his reaction speed and the speed of shooting the arrows were. Since the requirement was speed, then there was no reason for him to stop. Ning Ke's feet once again stepped on the accumulated rainwater on the street, and his body leaned forward like a leopard, running wildly toward the carriage. The boxwood bough in his hand was leveled in front of him, and the bowstring hummed. The arrows were shot out like lightning again. He was running in the rainy night, and he was shooting arrows while running. Chapter 62. In the blink of an eye, 14 lightning-fast feathered arrows appeared in the air between the front gate of the Chao mansion and the carriage in the rain. These arrows flew past Chao Xiaoshu, piercing through the dense raindrops, and strangely avoided the obstruction of the burly coachman on the shaft of the carriage. Then, they left 14 holes in the curtain of the carriage and whizzed through. Xiao Kuyu frowned within the carriage. His old face, which had already been extremely distressed, now seemed even more haggard. He stared at the space in front of him, his body filling the carriage with what seemed to be an inexhaustible amount of psychic power, filling the carriage with a faint scent of orchids. It was a very strange scene in this orchid-like air. The lightning-fast feathered arrows outside the carriage, once they neared the body of this old warrior, seemed to have entered a relatively static space. In an instant, they lost all their speed and became motionless objects. The 14 feathered arrows all strangely floated in the air, not a single one able to touch his simple clothes. 1 arrow floated in the air within the carriage, less than 3 inches away from Xiao Kuyu's tightly furrowed brows. 2 arrows were motionless in front of him, and even more were suspended in front of his hands. The motionless feathered arrows floated down lightly, like the rain outside the carriage, or more like tender green leaves that had been struck by the rain. No matter how sharp the arrowhead was, no matter how hard the shaft, once it lost the speed bestowed by the boxwood bough and the twisted tendon string, it lost all its lethality and fell at Xiao Kuyu's feet like garbage. But in order to deal with these 14 lightning-fast feathered arrows, even Xiao Kuyu, a warrior of the army, could not help but be affected. His psychic power over the control of the chi of heaven and earth around the carriage began to show a slight flaw. For someone like Chao Xiaoshu, any flaw in the enemy was an opportunity for him. He felt the layers of silk binding around his heart loosen a little, and the pain from the thousands of needles stabbing into his sea of chi lessened a little. His steady footsteps suddenly faltered, and with a clear whistle, his green robes fluttered in the wind. His entire body became like a falling leaf as he floated towards the carriage. The tall and sturdy coachman on the shaft let out a muffled groan. The horsewhip in his hand, which was made of an unknown material, fiercely lashed out. His coarse clothes emitted a dim, earthy yellow light. Obviously, he was a warrior. An old and frail psyche master with a shockingly high cultivation state would definitely have close attendance with strong martial skills. Even Ning Ke could think of this, so Chao Xiaoshu naturally would not miscalculate. As the whip lashed down, the wind and rain dispersed. Chao Xiaoshu's soaked green robe billowed in the strong wind. At this moment, his body had already turned into a fallen leaf, dodging the attack with extreme gentleness and ease. The middle and index fingers of his left hand formed a sword sign and poked the body of the cart driver across the air. Where his fingertips pointed, a white line suddenly appeared amidst the scattered raindrops. The driver groaned again and drew an arc in the air to smash the finger. When he was about to stop Chao Xiaoshu again, he was interrupted by a sharp pain in his lower abdomen. He widened his eyes and looked down, only to see an ordinary-looking padao deeply inserted into his abdomen. Ning Ke, who was running and shooting arrows all the way in the rain, knew that the psyche master in the carriage and the coachman on the shaft were both cultivators. But he did not stop at all. He only ran to the front of the carriage a little later than Chao Xiaoshu. Then, he rolled on the ground and ducked under the two horses. He avoided the gaze of the cart driver and pulled out his padao. He was under the horse's abdomen, but the padao in his right hand was held tightly from behind the horse's buttocks. From below the shaft of the carriage, he stabbed upwards. This insidious padao accurately avoided the soft armor that the other party might be wearing, and stabbed deeply into the other party's lower abdomen. The blade entering the abdomen was not a fatal wound. Ning Ke turned his wrist expressionlessly and twisted the padao in his hand. Suddenly, the internal organs of the cart driver's abdomen were twisted into a mess. The coachman looked at the padao that kept twisting in his abdomen. His face was full of fear and despair, and his throat made a gurgling sound. The surface of the metal blade, which had been washed by the rain for a long time, was already cold, but he felt like it was burning hot. Ning Ke was not in the mood to appreciate his opponent's expression before his death. He put his palm on the shaft of the carriage and nimbly flipped his body, rushing past the side of the cart driver and closely following Chao Xiaoshu's figure into the mysterious carriage. The curtains rose and the chilly spring rain poured in. Chao Xiaoshu's face was pale, but his eyes were bright. He waved his hand to deflect the short cane that Xiao Kuyu had thrown at him. Xiao Kuyu's expression suddenly changed. He gathered all the psyche power in his body, intending to kill this troublesome Jianghu character. Ning Ke ducked between Chao Xiaoshu's knees and fell forward with a muffled groan. The sharp point of the padao in his hand ruthlessly pierced the sole of Xiao Kuyu's foot. Xiao Kuyu howled in pain like an old beast on the brink of death. Because of the sharp pain in the sole of his foot, his meditation was interrupted once again. But his withered palms were already spread open like cattail leaf fans, ready to strike down. Chao Xiaoshu, expressionless, slammed his head into the old man's chest, breaking apart his opponent's concentrated psyche power. He pulled out a shiny dagger from his boot and ruthlessly stabbed it into the old man's neck. Puff. 1 stab. 2 stab. 3 stab. 14 stab. Chao Xiaoshu knelt on Xiao Kuyu's skinny body, his left hand pressing down on the old man's right shoulder and his right hand stabbing him with the sharp dagger. His face was expressionless. Blood sprayed on his green robe, turning into an inexplicable dark red flower. Only when the old man's neck was only connected by a thin layer of skin and flesh, and even Lord Haotian could not revive him, did Chao Xiaoshu withdraw the dagger in his hand and slowly stand up in the carriage. The other carriage at the mouth of the alley had not moved. It had been quietly parked in the boundless spring rain. Whether it was the massacre at the beginning, the fierce battle in Chao Manor, or the soul-stirring slaying of a psychic with an arrow knife in the alley, none of it had moved the slightly plump young man in the carriage. He only stared quietly at his lotus-like fingers, lost in thought. In the world of cultivators, there were a few universally recognized laws. A psyche master of the same state could basically sweep away a sword master or a talisman master of the same state, just like Liu Qinchen, who could firmly suppress the abandoned disciple of the academy at the entrance of the northern mountain road. But the final result of tonight's battle was somewhat unexpected. Both of them are at the upper level of the see-through state, but a great sword master killed a psyche master. It's really hard to understand. But Chao Xiaoshu, you are really amazing. A battle between cultivators has been forcibly fought out by you. Although the plump young man was young, he was already a minister of offerings in the prince's mansion. He silently admired Chao Xiaoshu's strength and vigor, but his eyes were still full of indifference. Previously, he did not want to fight, but he believed that as long as he fought, no matter how strong Chao Xiaoshu and the guy he had not seen were, they would only have a dead end. Because he was Wang Jinglu, invincible below the destiny state. Let's go. Let me send this legend of the Knight of Chang on his last journey. Wang Jinglu gently rubbed his smooth and tender fingers and said with a smile. His words were full of strong confidence and a trace of excitement that could not be concealed. Every time he was about to kill a real powerhouse, he would be very excited. The carriage did not move, and no one responded to his order. Wang Jinglu slightly frowned, and a few rare fine lines appeared on his tight and broad forehead. He squinted his eyes and felt the fluctuation of the primordial qi around the carriage through the heavy curtain, but he did not find anything strange, nor did he find anyone spying on him in the alley. There was only dead silence inside and outside the carriage, accompanied only by the sound of the rain. This young powerhouse, who was known as invincible below the destiny state, had a strong feeling of danger, but he felt that this feeling of danger was unfounded. He sat quietly in the carriage for a long time, listening to the sound of the rain outside. Suddenly, he reached out and lifted the heavy curtain in front of him. A corner of the curtain was lifted, and suddenly the corner of the curtain floated out. It floated half a foot away, and then lightly fell to the ground. Wang Jinglu squinted at the corner of the curtain in the distance. He slightly bent his right finger, and the curtain in front of him swayed again. Then, unsurprisingly, it was cut again, and became a piece of cloth in the rain. There seemed to be an invisible knife next to the carriage. He did not feel any fluctuation of the cultivator's psyche power, but only a very slight change in the primordial qi between heaven and earth the moment the curtain was cut and floated away. If he was not a powerhouse of the young generation of the Tang Empire, perhaps he would not even be able to detect the slight change in the primordial qi of heaven and earth. Thinking of a certain possibility, Wang Jinglu's face became slightly pale. After a while, his pride finally won over his fear of the unknown. With a muffled groan, his 10 chubby fingers bloomed like an overfed white lily. A strong wave instantly invaded from the inside of the carriage to the outside, shaking the windows and doors open. Then, with a clear cry, he was about to leap out of the carriage. But the next moment, he stopped in an extremely embarrassing manner, turning into a stone statue in the rain. The entire alley had become another world. His attempt to break out of the encirclement had directly triggered the dangerous qi between heaven and earth. The rainwater that had accumulated on the bluestone ground began to tremble violently, jumping into the air from time to time and then falling, just like the crazy dance of men and women in the spring festival of the great river kingdom. And the night sky above the alley had become Master Haotian's magical workshop, and all the raindrops falling from the night sky had become sharp and unstoppable little knives. Countless raindrops fell from the night sky like countless sharp knives, landing on the carriage in the alley, landing on the carriage board, shattering the carriage board into pieces, landing on the shaft of the carriage, turning the shaft into wood powder, landing on the bodies of the two fine horses in front of the shaft. The horses didn't even have the chance to make a sound before they were instantly cut into meat paste by the raindrops. Thousands of drops of spring rain fell into the alley, and everything around the carriage disintegrated in the rain. Strangely, the rain that fell into the carriage was as gentle as a real spring rain. It hit Wang Jinglu's pale cheeks, but did not leave a single trace of blood. In the rain, Wang Jinglu looked extremely embarrassed, sitting miserably on the only remaining piece of the carriage board under him. His clothes had long been soaked, and a few strands of wet hair hung weakly on his forehead. He looked up at the falling raindrops in the night sky with some confusion, and his body began to tremble violently uncontrollably, not knowing whether it was because of the cold or because of fear. With great difficulty, he lowered his head to look at the four alleys in the night around him. He looked at the dancing rainwater on the ground in the alleys, and looked at the faint word, well, formed by the four alleys and rainwater. His pale lips quivered slightly as he muttered to himself, "That's right." Well, Fu? Rainwater dripped from his wet hair on his forehead. Wang Jinglu turned his head in a daze, searching for traces of the enemy in the rainy night. His usual pride and confidence had long turned into despair and fear. He suddenly coughed violently, bent over, and patted the rainwater around him with his hands. He cried like a bullied child, "Impossible! How could there be a divine talisman master? Who drew this talisman?" Chapter 63. He entered the initial awareness state at the age of 4, the perception state at the age of 6, the no-doubt state at the age of 11, and the see-through state at the age of 16. It took him 10 years to reach the see-through state from the lower grade to the upper grade, and he won the title of being invincible below the knowing destiny state with consecutive victories. No matter how one looked at it, Wang Jinglu from the Xian mansion of Tang was a genius in cultivation. But Wang Jinglu was very clear that if he did not meet with the young men and women who occasionally came out of the unknown place, his reputation as a young genius in cultivation would not be solid. That was why he wanted others to say that he was a calm and experienced cultivator, and did not want others to praise him as a so-called young cultivation genius. He wanted to have the bearing and demeanor of a cultivator with a profound cultivation. That was why, even though he was very young and healthy, and did not have any lung disease, he would cough from time to time. But at this time, sitting in the spring rain awkwardly, he was really coughing. Because of fear and confusion, he was choked by the rain. His face was pale as he looked at the thin and tall Taoist who gradually appeared at the entrance of the alley. His body trembled more and more violently. The thin and tall old man who walked out of the alley was wearing a dirty Taoist robe. His robe was stained with oil stains, and his triangular eyes flickered. Coupled with a few sparse long beards, he looked abnormally obscene. He did not look like an otherworldly master at all. "I spent half a day drawing this talisman. What do you think?" The thin and tall Taoist asked seriously as he looked at Wang Jinglu, who was sitting in the alley through the layers of rain. At his feet, the fat middle-aged man from the prince's mansion had become a dead body. His clothes and even the skin under his clothes were cracked like paint flakes over the years. It looked extremely horrible. Wang Jinglu smiled sadly and looked at the thin and tall Taoist. He said dejectedly, "There are only a dozen talisman masters in the Tang Empire. The one who is willing to wear the Taoist robe is naturally one of the 4 divine talisman masters of the South School of Haotian Taoism. It needs a divine talisman master like you to spend half a day to draw a talisman. With the street as the foundation and the rain as the ink, this talisman is naturally terrifying. I just don't understand why you don't directly kill me. The divine talisman master of the South School of Haotian frowned slightly. He waved his hand and drew a word in the air to drive away the annoying spring rain around him. He shook his head and said, "The monk of the Ueluan kingdom, the swordsman of the South Jin kingdom, the old man of the military ministry, these people are all dead. But you are different. I received orders not to let you fight because I wanted to protect you. Wang Jinglu, you've already reached the threshold of the knowing destiny state at such a young age. It's really rare. I heard from the academy that the nation master and the emperor's younger brother have also commented on you. They think that you're very likely to touch the paper above the 5 states after 40 years. It's not easy for the Tang Empire to produce a young genius, so you have to try your best to live for another 40 years. The expression on Wang Jinglu's face kept changing. Don't go back to the prince's mansion. Go to the front lines and serve for 3 years to atone for your crimes. After saying this, the divine talisman master turned around and walked into the dark alley, murmuring, "Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion is not a kitten or a puppy. If he was so easy to kill, wouldn't I have killed him 10 years ago?" With a slight shake of his sleeve, the thin cyan steel sword that had fallen into the rain buzzed and flew back to Chao Xiaoshu's hand. He looked back at Ning Ke, who was standing behind him, and confirmed that the lad was not seriously injured except for some small wounds. He nodded and put the sword back into the sheath, leaving the horse carriage and walking to the front of the alley. When he reached the intersection of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, Chao Xiaoshu stopped and looked at the place behind the curtain of rain. Ning Ke raised his arm to wipe off the rain on his forehead and followed his gaze. After a long silence he asked, "Are you still waiting for someone?" "Yes." Chao Xiaoshu pressed his right hand on the hilt of his sword and said, "A person named Wang Jinglu, but it seems that he won't come." Ning Ke frowned and transferred the padao from his right hand to his left hand. He asked, "Why?" Chao Xiaoshu looked back at the black mask on Ning Ke's face and said with a smile, "It's not easy for the Tang Empire to produce a cultivation genius. Maybe some people don't want to see him die in our hand. I'm not as confident as you are." Ning Ke recalled the continuous battles tonight and those powerful cultivators. He thought that if it weren't for Chao Xiaoshu, he would have died long ago. He sighed and said, "If it's because of that trump card of yours, why didn't he act earlier? Why did he insist on you fighting to the death? I've explained to you on Lin 47th Street that once that trump card is revealed, no one in Chang'an will dare to act. Then, there's no way to know how many trump cards those nobles have in their hands and what their intentions are." Chao Xiaoshu suddenly said, "Accompany me for a walk." Ning Ke raised his right arm and wiped off the rain and blood on the blade with his sleeve. He put the blade back into the sheath on his back and nodded. The rain was lighter than before, falling on the streets around the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Chao Xiaoshu's hand left the hilt of his sword and put it behind his back. He walked on the quiet street, his indigo robe still straight and his face still calm. Other than that, there seemed to be no change. Ning Ke followed behind him, tearing off a corner of his robe to bandage the wound on his left arm. Though the wounds were shallow and thin, he was used to saving every drop of blood and strength since he came out of Min Mountain. The two of them walked around the Spring Breeze Pavilion in the rainy alley and wet street, like a pair of lion and tiger brothers who had just gone through a bloody battle and began to patrol their territory. Walking back to the front door of the Chao mansion, Chao Xiaoshu's face showed faint exhaustion. He rubbed between his eyebrows, lifted the lapel of his indigo robe and sat on the wet stone step. Several remaining soldiers of the Tang army shouted and rushed toward him. Ning Ke pulled out the padao on his back and chopped it in front of him. Every flash of the padao would cut down an opponent. The soldiers of the Tang army who rushed to the front of the stone steps fell one by one like trees. At the same time, he kept murmuring, "Wandering in Jianghu, how can you not be stabbed? I'll chop you to death with one stroke, I'll chop you to death with 2 strokes." Sitting on the wet stone steps, Cao Shaoshu wearily supported his body with the sheath of his sword. Looking at the scene in front of him, the light in his eyes became more and more intense. He had long noticed that Ning Ke's bladesmanship had the shadow of the military bladesmanship, but the exquisite choice of timing and position could only be comprehended in a life-and-death situation. Ning Ke's bladesmanship was steady and even simple, but occasionally it was strange and erratic like raindrops. It always followed a principle, that was, to use the blade the most effortless, and the place where the blade fell must be the weakest part of the opponent. This is the real bladesmanship for killing. Looking at the flashes of the padao, Cao Shaoshu recalled the scenes of the battle. Ning Ke had shown a strong will and excellent judgment, and then thought of his real age. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart, "It's a pity that this little guy can't cultivate. Otherwise, he would occupy a very important position in the future of the Tang Empire." Looking at the corpses in front of the mansion like rotten wood soaked in the rain, and looking at the lad panting with the padao on his shoulder, Cao Shaoshu smiled and said, "Can't killing be a little poetic? When you kill, it's more like you're hoeing the field." Ning Ke turned around, the padao on his shoulder bringing up a streak of blood. He looked at the middle-aged man on the stone steps and pointed at the night rain falling from the sky, panting and saying, "It's always wet. As for hoeing the field, it's not as tiring as chopping people." Chapter 64. It was late at night on Lin 47th Street. The door of the old brush pen shop was pushed open and then quickly closed. The dim lights inside flickered like stars and then went out again. Ning Ke untied the heavy weapon on his back, tore off the cloth cover of the big black umbrella, and took off his wet and heavy outer shirt. He handed it to Sang Sang, who was standing in front of him, and asked casually, "I'm hungry. Is the noodles ready?" Sang Sang handed him the dry towel and nodded happily. "I'll serve it to you." A bowl of hot noodle soup was served. It was still 4 Sichuan peppers, but there were more chopped green onions than usual. The golden and tender fried egg on the noodles was extremely rare. Chopping people was indeed more tiring than hoeing. Ning Ke was wet all over and his stomach was wet. How could he resist the temptation of fried egg noodles with scallions? His eyes lit up. He put down the wet towel and picked up the chopsticks to eat the noodles in big mouthfuls. It was extremely delicious. Seeing that he was eating happily, Sang Sang's tanned face was full of joy. She picked up the slightly wet towel and stood behind him to dry his hair. From time to time, she reminded him that it was too hot and he shouldn't eat too quickly. At this moment, 2 coughs sounded in the dark shop. The big boss of Chang and City, who had been ignored and seemed to be invisible, finally couldn't help but say, "The noodles are very fragrant." Several hours ago, Cao Shaoshu had said the same thing when he came to the old brush pen shop. Sang Sang continued to dry Ning Ke's hair, pretending not to see him or hear his words. Ning Ke's reaction was a little different from before. He lowered his head to eat the noodle soup and said vaguely, "Give him a bowl." After a while, the second bowl of noodle soup was served. Cao Shaoshu looked around and found that there was nothing else to sit on except the armchair. But he didn't care. He squatted down beside Ning Ke and took a few bites with his chopsticks, only to find that his noodles seemed to be different from Ning Ke's. The standard 4 Sichuan peppers, 30 chopped green onions, but no fried egg. He couldn't help but pick up his chopsticks and gently knock on the edge of Ning Ke's bowl to remind him. Ning Ke glanced at it out of the corner of his eye and almost laughed out loud. He turned to Sang Sang and said, "Don't be too stingy. Fry another egg." Finally, the omelette was ready. Ning Ke and Cao Shaoshu held large bowls of noodles and ate happily. Sang Sang squatted not far from them and put the clothes and the cloth cover into a copper basin to burn. No one in the shop spoke. After some time, Ning Kei put down the bowl of noodles in his hand and leaned back comfortably. He rubbed his slightly bulging belly and looked at Chao Xiaoshu, who was squatting beside him. He said, "I killed more than 5 people. You can count again. Don't be stingy. I asked Sang Sang to add fried eggs for you." Chao Xiaoshu held the bowl of noodles, looked at him and said with a bitter smile, "So you were waiting for me here. 2,000 taels. Deal." Ning Kei seemed to be casual, but he was actually a little excited. As for Sang Sang, who was squatting beside the copper basin to burn the clothes, she clenched her small fists tightly and secretly calculated how big a pile of 2,000 taels of silver would be. Sang Sang was about to wash the bowls when Chao Xiaoshu reluctantly handed over the bowl of noodle soup. Then he frowned slightly and slowly raised the corner of his sleeve to cover his mouth. When he put it down again, there were some blood stains on his sleeve. Ning Kei looked at his sleeve and knew that this extremely powerful middle-aged man had suffered serious injuries in the previous series of battles. After a moment of silence he asked, "Are you all right?" Chao Xiaoshu took a bowl of coarse tea from Sang Sang and smiled to express his gratitude. After a sip, he said calmly, "Don't worry. I grew up in the slums of the eastern city. I don't know how many fights I've fought in my life, and how many times I've suffered more serious injuries than this. Every time my enemies saw me covered in blood and thought I would never get up again, I always got up and gave them a fatal blow." Ning Kei said self-deprecatingly, "A gangster who only knows how to fight can actually cultivate and be so powerful. I'm so devoted to cultivation, but I can't even touch the door of the initial state. Old Master Haotian is really blind." Chao Xiaoshu smiled and did not continue this topic. A gang leader who had been immersed in the dark Jianghu of Chang all his life and finally became a great sword master at the upper grade of see-through state must have had some lucky chances, but those lucky chances were not worth mentioning. "You said that after tonight, you'll be able to reveal your trump card." Ning Kei's gaze passed through the wooden door of the shop and fell on a corner of the palace wall in the distance. He said, "Now I can roughly guess that your trump card is in the palace. With such a powerful background, no wonder you can ignore the Chang and local government. After tonight, perhaps the whole empire will envy me, because I have such a person standing behind me." Chao Xiaoshu said calmly, "But no one will know what I've sacrificed for him." "What do you need to sacrifice to work for the nobles in the palace?" Ning Kei asked. Chao Xiaoshu smiled and said, "If I hadn't been entangled by mundane affairs these years and had to deal with countless trivial things when the person in the palace had a thought, perhaps I would have already broken through the see-through state and stepped into the destiny state." "That's all?" Ning Kei continued to ask. Chao Xiaoshu seemed to have thought of something and fell into a long silence. His smile became a little distant and he said slowly, "I still need you to sacrifice your courage. You have to consider the big picture when doing things, so sometimes you can't be happy. Because to force out all the trump cards of the opponent, I had to endure for several months, so I couldn't even protect my own brother." Hearing this, Ning Kei's right hand slightly tightened. He knew that Chao Xiaoshu was talking about Darky, but he didn't answer and didn't mention the relationship between him and Darky. He lowered his head and asked, "How did your brother die?" "My brother was called Zhuer, a spy. The military ministry sent him to lurk around me and asked him to investigate whether I had colluded with the Yueluan kingdom. In fact, they just wanted to find an excuse to attack Spring Breeze Pavilion, or even directly frame me. But brothers are brothers after all. He told me all the inside story, so naturally he wouldn't investigate me for the military ministry, nor would he frame me according to the military ministry's military order. And as a soldier of the Tang Empire, he couldn't betray the secrets of his comrade. So he was stuck in the middle these few months and was very painful." Chao Xiaoshu slightly lowered his eyes and said, "Now that I think about it, Even if it would make the person in the palace angry, I should have told him the truth earlier. Maybe he would die eventually, but at least he wouldn't have been so painful during that time. Ninkei casually asked, but you still didn't say how he died. Being a spy is the most dangerous kind of job. When he doesn't lean towards any side, he can die at any time, and when he decides to lean towards one side, he is more likely to face death. That day, he finally decided to tell me the military ministry's plan, but it was discovered by the military ministry. So he was purged and died opposite this shop. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the wooden door of the shop and the gray wall that he couldn't see. After a moment of silence, Ning Kei asked, "Was the sword master from South Jin Kingdom who killed him?" "Yes." Chao Xiaoshu looked back at Akiji's face and said with a smile, "From now on, we are brothers." Ning Kei slightly raised his eyebrows and replied with a smile, "Isn't this too childish?" Chao Xiaoshu laughed and said, "We are brothers for a lifetime. This kind of thing is that simple. A lifetime is just 2 bowls of noodles with fried eggs." Ning Kei shook his head and said with a smile, "The word brothers is a bit vulgar. And those famous brothers that I know, if it wasn't for the fact that some of them were lucky enough to die first, they would eventually turn against each other. Tonight, I just want to help you and earn some money. Can you not be so vulgar and find some other meaning in life?" Chao Xiaoshu slowly frowned and looked at Ning Kei with interest. He was a little surprised to hear such a reply and asked, "At your age, the world in your eyes is so gray. I am really curious about your past now. If you are interested in telling me about it in the future, please remember to call me. I will buy you some tea." Ning Kei replied, "I don't even want to remember those things, let alone tell others about them." Chao Xiaoshu smiled and said, "All right, then what do you think the real meaning of life is other than noodles with fried eggs?" "The meaning of life is of course career and love, or money and women. I know you think this sentence is very clever, and you think that I am also very clever, but can you not laugh so mysteriously?" Ning Kei shook his head helplessly. In order to let this big boss of Chang understand the meaning of life, he pointed to Sang Sang, who had just walked over, and asked, "Which girl in the House of Red Sleeves do you think is suitable to be your mistress?" Sang Sang wiped her little hands on her apron and thought seriously for a long time with her brows furrowed. Then she carefully said, "I think the second girl sitting on your left is quite good. That is Lu Shui." Ning Kei thought of the girl's soft waist and asked with a smile, "Why do you think this girl is suitable to be my wife?" Sang Sang opened her willowy eyes and answered seriously, "Her face is well powdered and looks clean when she smiles. Her teeth are white and neat. She looks very healthy. And I have peeked at her waist and buttocks. She should be good for having children in the future." Ning Kei turned around and smiled proudly at Chao Xiaoshu. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the little dimple on Ning Kei's left cheek and thought, guarding a shop every day, discussing with his underage handmaiden which prostitute is suitable to have children and be his wife. Is this the meaning of life? Suddenly, he thought of the handmaiden leaning against the door before he left the old brush pen shop and the 2 steaming hot bowls of noodles with fried eggs when he returned to the shop. He thought of himself who had been forgotten in the corner and the feeling that no one could come between the master and the handmaiden. Gradually, he understood something and said with a smile, "So the meaning of life is to live." Ning Kei shook his head and said with a smile, "Sour? That's too sour." Chao Xiaoshu looked at the lad's expression and knew that he did not understand what he was talking about. Naturally, he would not point it out. He stood up and walked to the door of the shop. He turned around and said with a smile, "I should go. There are many things to deal with in Chang'an tonight. Someone will give you the money tomorrow, and then he will take you to a place." Hearing the last few words, Ning Kei's face showed a trace of vigilance. He did not ask where he was going but directly asked the key point of the matter, "Can I not go?" Chao Xiaoshu pushed open the wooden door of the shop and said without hesitation, "No." Chapter 65. Chang and city must be very lively tonight. After a night of fighting, Ning Ke was very tired, but the blood and knives in the rainy night made him a little excited. He imagined what was happening in each of the markets, guessed Chao Xiaoshu's trump card, and speculated where he would go the next day. He tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. He kicked Sang Sang awake through the thin quilt. They talked about these things for a while, but still couldn't understand. Sang Sang saw that he looked haggard but couldn't fall asleep. She thought for a while, put on an unlined robe, and brought back a jar of liquor. The two sat on opposite sides of the bed and drank. As usual, most of the liquor went into Sang Sang's stomach. Ning Ke couldn't overcome the alcohol after a few sips and finally fell asleep. The next morning, the spring rain that had lingered for several days suddenly stopped. The beautiful sun came out from behind the rain clouds without a greeting and shone on the birds jumping in the treetop. A horse carriage quietly stopped at the door of the old brush pen shop. A young man who looked like a manservant got off the carriage. He pushed open the half-closed wooden door without a greeting and looked at the master and servant who had just woken up. He raised his chin slightly and said coldly, "Let's go." This was probably the person Chao Xiaoshu had said would come to pick him up. Ning Ke looked at the manservant and noticed that the man's eyes and brows were peaceful, but there was a hint of arrogance in them. From the man's flat Adam's apple and his slightly different standing posture, he should be one of the eunuchs in the palace. Last night, Ning Ke knew that Chao Xiaoshu's backer was in the palace. Today, a little eunuch came to pick him up. Naturally, Ning Ke wasn't too surprised. He was just thinking about whether he should give him a red packet and how big it should be. In his impression of the novels, the emperor was not anxious, but the eunuchs were anxious. It meant that the emperor was easy to provoke, but the eunuchs were not. In the stories, whenever the protagonist met a eunuch, no matter if the eunuch was a steward or a servant, he would choose an opportunity to hand over a few thin banknotes or even a piece of jade. When he read those stories, the biggest question he had was, where did the protagonists get so many pieces of jade? Note: Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and glanced at Sang Sang, asking her if she should prepare something with his eyes. Sang Sang had always been a stingy girl. She was slightly startled and turned her head away, pretending that she did not understand what he meant. Her young master was not a generous person. After thinking for a while, she decided that she might as well pretend to be ignorant and save some money. The little eunuch held his hands behind his back and casually looked around the shop. Like an old man, he nodded and said in a clear voice, "I heard that there are some good characters in this alley. Today I came to take a look, and it is indeed not bad. There are nobles in the palace who want to see your writing. Quickly wash up and come with me." Ning Ke thought that this was a good excuse. He looked at his clothes and bowed to the young eunuch with hands folded in front. He said with a smile, "This is how I usually dress. How can a poor scholar dress up like a flower?" He was a little worried that the eunuch would make things difficult for him because he did not receive the red envelope. He did not expect that the eunuch did not care. Instead, he smiled and seemed to like his way of talking. He nodded at him and walked out of the shop. In the somewhat cramped carriage, the little eunuch closed his eyes and rested all the way. Judging from his behavior at Lin 47th Street, he did not seem to have any opinions about Ning Ke, nor did he disdain to talk to him. He was just habitually cautious outside the palace. Ning Ke, on the contrary, felt that it was so quiet. He lifted a corner of the curtain and looked at the scenery along the street. Under the bright sunshine, the people of Chang'an walked in the marketplace with smiles on their faces. The business of the breakfast shops was booming. From time to time, he could hear people calling for their friends. There was no trace of the bloody fight in Jianghu last night. After an unknown amount of time, 2 rows of willow trees blocked their line of sight. A comfortable shadow covered the entire carriage and the stone path that the carriage passed through. The shadow did not come from the willow trees, but from the royal palace behind the willow trees and the moat. The Tang Empire was the most powerful country in the world. Chang'an City was the most magnificent city in the world. The imperial palace of the Tang Empire could be described as the most magnificent palace in the world. It might not be appropriate to use the word magnificent to describe the imperial palace. However, the imperial palace of the Tang Empire had inherited the grandeur of the Tang people for thousands of years. The red walls were thick and the yellow eaves were like swords. The atmosphere was grand and solemn. It did not look like a romantic and noble place where the 3 palaces, 6 courtyards, and 72 concubines gathered in the morning. Instead, it looked more like an impregnable pass standing in the center of the Tang Empire. Ning Ke looked up at the majestic imperial palace. His gaze followed the extremely high red walls to the Tang Empire's Yulin Forest army soldiers who looked like black dots on the city wall. His expression was calm, but he was silently admiring it. It was a pity that the carriage did not enter through the Vermilion Bird main gate. Instead, it went around the moat and then drove in through a very inconspicuous side gate. The carriage entered the imperial palace and drove slowly on the narrow road. It did not know how many turns it took. His line of sight was completely blocked by the high walls and eaves beside the carriage. He could only see the sky that was cut into pieces by the eaves. He did not have the chance to see the entire imperial palace. He only felt that the palace inside was extremely high. In the distance they could see a blue lake. The young eunuch led Ning Ke down the carriage and started walking. The two walked along the dense sea of bamboo by the lake. After a few minutes, they passed through a wide rain corridor supported by red pillars and stopped in front of a row of small inconspicuous halls. What made Ning Ke feel a little confused and even vigilant was that he did not see any bodyguards on such a long journey. He did not even see a eunuch or palace maid. The young eunuch turned his head and looked at him expressionlessly. He said, "This is the imperial study. I can only bring you up to here. You can wait here. Someone will bring you out of the palace after you have seen them." Ning Ke did not care much. He was looking at the strange flowers and trees in front of the hall with great interest. He looked at the flower boats on the lake that were covered by weeping willows in the distance. He was just about to see if he could see a few beautiful palace maids when he suddenly heard the words, "Imperial Study." His body could not help but slightly stiffen. He turned around and looked at the inconspicuous rooms behind him in shock. A man's most private place was not the bedroom, but the study. In the snowy morning of winter, he could read forbidden books in the study. In the summer dusk, he could watch erotic movies naked in the study. In the warm afternoon of spring, he could write ambiguous love letters in the study. In the late night of autumn, he could pull his red sleeves and knead them in his arms. There were no old women to disturb him here. There were no children to play with. All private and happy things could be done openly with the fragrance of books. No one would disturb him. The emperor was also a man. The imperial study was naturally his most private place. In history, many important events and dirty things happened in the imperial study. If one was not the emperor's most trusted confidant or a confidant that he was prepared to give absolute trust to, he was absolutely not qualified to enter the imperial study. Wu Zetian entered the imperial study, Zhang Juzheng entered the imperial study, Wei Zhongxian entered the imperial study, Wei Xiaobao entered the imperial study. Ning Ke stared blankly at the closed door of the imperial study and thought with emotion. How many great women and former eunuchs and powerful officials had become successful because they entered this small study? He did not expect that such an opportunity would fall on his head today. Last night, he guessed that Chao Xiaoshu's backer was someone in the palace, and that person in the palace was very likely His Majesty himself. However, guessing and proving it were two different things. The youth who had been homeless and miserable for the past 16 years suddenly found that he seemed to have the opportunity to rise to the top in a single step. He could not help but feel a little shocked. He finally understood that what Chao Xiaoshu said last night was truer than gold and silver. This was really the thickest thigh in the world. No one will come here in half an hour. If anyone asks, just answer as I taught you. Say that Lu Ji brought you into the palace. Full of emotion, Ning Kai did not notice that the little eunuch had quietly left. When he woke up, he found that there was no one around the imperial study. He was in a strange and strict palace with no one around him. The cool and pleasant environment suddenly became a little gloomy. Even someone as bold as him could not help but feel a little uncomfortable. He stood in front of the corridor and waited for a moment. Suddenly, he thought that he should go in first. He and Sang Sang had been amazed for a long time when they entered Chang, a city like country bumpkins. Moreover, this was the palace. He did not understand the rules at all. He just thought this way according to common sense, so he did as he said. He gently coughed twice and pretended to bow to the imperial study. Then he pushed the door open and walked in. The so-called natural course was all fake. Ning Kai just wanted to go in. Over the years, the most important part of his life, besides meditation and martial arts, was calligraphy. Today, he had a rare opportunity to enter the imperial study. Of course, he was eager to see this study, which was rumored to have countless famous calligraphies. This desire was so strong that he had completely forgotten the so-called rules. Pushing open the door and entering, the first thing that entered his eyes was an extremely tall row of bookshelves leaning against the wall. The bookshelves were horizontal and vertical, and their style was extremely ordinary and simple. However, the wood used was the extremely valuable Dongyu Wangwali. The bookshelves were densely packed with all kinds of books, and the arrangement was uneven. However, they were all extremely valuable and unique treasures. There were a few sheets of writing paper on the desk. A brush was placed on the inkstone like a thin raft in a clear pool, immersed in the ink, and several other brushes were placed messily on the brush rack. The paper was Xianzhou bud paper, the brush was Hengyan pure brush, the ink was Chenzhou pine ink, and the inkstone was Huangzhou mud inkstone. None of them were eye-catching, but all of them were precious tributes. If these brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone could be taken back to Lin 47th Street and sold, how much could they be sold for? Ning Kai looked around in a daze, and for no reason, such a ridiculous idea came into his mind. Then his eyes were attracted by the calligraphy hanging on the 3 white walls. Looking at these calligraphy that were hard to find in the world, he was shocked beyond words. He slowly moved his feet, and his eyes fell on the original works of famous calligraphies, as well as the inscriptions and seals. His right hand subconsciously drew in the air, and began to copy them. His face was full of praise and joy. He went to the desk and looked at the 5 thick characters on the paper. He could not help but frown and murmured, "His Majesty's appreciation is very high, but this calligraphy is really not good." Chapter 66. On the slightly granular Xianzhou bud paper, the ink was dripping and unruly, and 5 words were written: "The fish leaps into the sea." Looking at the frame of the ink scroll, there should have been another sentence on the paper, but for some reason, the writer stopped after writing these 5 words. The middle section of the last hook of the word, sea, was left blank, faintly revealing a hint of unwillingness. These 5 words were written in a strict and elegant manner. It would have been good if written by an ordinary person, but in Ning Kai's eyes, it did not look impressive at all. Especially since he had just read the authentic works of the predecessors, he naturally felt that these 5 words, "fish leaping across this sea," were quite terrible. Even if he guessed that these words were written by His Majesty, it would not change his impression. Thinking that he entered the palace today under the name of a calligrapher, Ning Kai's heart slightly moved. He secretly thought that if his calligraphy caught the eye of His Majesty in the future, then he would have a meteoric rise. It would not be bad to become an unpopular but extremely glorious court official. Just as he was thinking about this, he suddenly heard an angry voice from afar behind the imperial study. The voice was thick and powerful, but it seemed especially violent. However, because it was too far away, he could only hear the most angry words of the person who scolded him. Idiot! Idiot! A bunch of idiots! The two words, idiot, were scolded by that person. It was sonorous and powerful like a war drum, and it was as clear as hitting a plate. Ning Ke stood in the imperial study in a daze, listening to the word, idiot, that seemed to come from beyond the sky. Gradually, he could not help but be fascinated by it. He felt a great sense of familiarity in his heart. He secretly wondered which steward was scolding idiots in such a coquettish manner. The Tang Imperial Palace was such a solemn place. Even the most powerful eunuch steward dared not scold people in such a loud voice, not to mention that the voice of idiot came from the discussion hall. Ning Ke was not clear about the distribution of the buildings in the palace. Of course, he did not know that the area around the imperial study had always been heavily guarded. The discussion hall happened to be very close to the imperial study, so he could hear countless words of idiot, but others could not. Inside the Palace of Council, there were coiled dragons on the jade pillars, and the golden curtains were embroidered with heavenly maids scattering flowers. On the left side of the imperial couch sat a beautiful woman dressed in palace attire. She was about 30 years old, with beautiful eyebrows and eyes. She looked charming and gentle, and her slightly thick lips were tightly pursed, which added a hint of firmness. Looking at her head ornament and phoenix dress, she was the Queen of Tang. On the right side of the imperial couch sat a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Her eyes were slightly drooping, and she was using her slender fingers to serve tea. Her beautiful face, coupled with her tranquil expression, made her look extremely graceful. Her slightly tanned cheeks, which had been tanned from running on the grasslands, had now returned to fair in less than 10 days. She was the fourth princess of the Tang Empire, Liu. Between the empress and the princess, there was a middle-aged man sitting on the couch. His black hair was casually tied behind his head, and he wore an extremely large robe. His voice was gentle, powerful, and unquestionable. Occasionally, when he said those two words, his voice would jump up like a cloud hitting a mountain, and thunder would ring through the palace. On the ground in front of the couch, there were more than a dozen officials kneeling. Their heads were deeply buried, and their bodies were trembling slightly, looking particularly ashamed and frightened. The prince and the two old ministers who were qualified to sit also looked extremely ugly. The Tang Empire had never paid much attention to secular rules. Even in the daily discussions and interactions between the emperor and his ministers, the ministers often did not need to kneel and kowtow, but only needed to make a deep bow. This was especially so for the current emperor, who was known for his benevolence. Normally, when the emperor and his ministers met in the discussion hall, His Majesty would even wave away the deep bow with a wave of his hand. However, today, the benevolent emperor suddenly burst into a thunderous rage. The ministers of the Tang Empire finally realized that His Majesty did not allow them to kneel usually because he did not like it. When he was unhappy, the discussion hall became terrifying. The middle-aged man on the couch was naturally the emperor of the Tang Empire, the person with the greatest secular power in the Haotian world. He looked at the ministers kneeling on the cold golden bricks in front of him, and his calm but mocking gaze slowly swept across their faces. The governor of the army, the protector general, the Huaihua general, these were all the bigwigs of the military ministry, the minister of the right, the assistant minister of the central department, the old and young masters of the Ministry of Revenue, the governor of the capital, the assistant minister of the Yellow Gate, the two statues in Chang'an, his younger brother sitting in the chair, and those old fellows. How much did they know about this matter? How can a gang take over the river transport business and move grain from the warehouse? You are all high-ranking officials in the imperial court, and a word from the steward of the mansion would make many people tremble in fear. How dare Chao Xiaoshu not listen to you? Are you really a bunch of idiots? Have you never thought of the reason? The emperor of the Tang Empire looked at his ministers as if he was looking at a group of bastards. His right hand touched the back of his head that was faintly aching, and he even had the urge to laugh out loud because of anger and disappointment. He stared at the crowd, slammed the table, and scolded, "You want to know who is the backer of the #1 gang in Chang'an? Now you know, and you know it's me. Don't you think you've become the biggest idiot in the world? The Fish Dragon Gang. The Fish Dragon Gang. You are all well-educated people who are used to seeing the wind and rain, and yet none of you have thought of the 4 words, Fish Dragon Gang? If it wasn't my intention, who in Chang'an would dare to use this name as a gang name? I am very disappointed in you, not because you ignore the law and oppress the people, but because you are stupid. Idiots. You haven't understood such a simple thing after so many years. If you are not idiots, then who are you?" The chaotic fight in Chang'an, and on a rainy spring night, had finally succeeded in forcing Cao Xiaoshu to use his trump card. However, as soon as this trump card was revealed, the wind and rain disappeared without a trace, because this trump card was too powerful. It was so powerful that it could define everyone as an idiot with just one sentence, and then start to settle accounts later. The ministers kneeling in the hall felt so wronged and sad that they didn't know what to say. They silently thought that for so many years, no one had found any connection between the Fish Dragon Gang and the palace. Besides, the emperor was the noble emperor, while the Fish Dragon Gang was just a small carp in the gutter of Chang'an. Their statuses were thousands of miles apart, and they didn't exist in the same world at all. Who would have thought that there was a connection between them? It was like an advisor in the county government went to make things difficult for a small helper in the kitchen, and in the end, the advisor found out that the helper was under the protection of the Minister of Revenue. But the problem was, how could a guy who was under the protection of the Minister of Revenue be a small helper in the county government's kitchen? If Cao Xiaoshu was an old acquaintance that your Majesty met in the common people, and the two of them had a friendship, then why had he been soaking in the stinky gutter of Jianghu all these years? As long as your Majesty said the word, wherein the Empire couldn't find a 4th or 5th rank official post for him. This was not because the princes and ministers were idiots, it was purely because your Majesty was playing with us as idiot. Kneeling on the cold golden bricks and sitting restlessly on the chairs, the Tang nobles and ministers were all full of complaints, but no one dared to jump out and argue with the one on the dragon throne at this time. For these big shots of the Empire, winning over or subduing Spring Breeze Pavilion Old Chow was a small matter, but they had encountered the biggest mountain in the world, so they knew that they were bound to be unlucky. More importantly, their subordinates and deputies were responsible for the specific handling of these matters, and they used the power of the imperial court and even the military, which had already touched the bottom line of His Majesty. How should this matter be resolved? Chapter 67. Xing Qingyu, the Minister of Revenue, had never felt that the golden bricks of the conference hall were so hard. In fact, he rarely knelt except during the Grand Court Conference, let alone for such a long time. He secretly wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and felt that his spine was on the verge of breaking. In order to find some kind of psychological comfort, he sneaked a glance to the side and saw the dejected faces of the military officials. Sure enough, he felt a lot more comforted. 2 emotions, luck and fear, rose in his heart. The logistics office wanted the land on Lin 47th Street. It seemed to be the main cause of this conflict, but it was just a small prelude. Although I knew about it, I never intervened. However, the military ministry was deeply involved this time. I heard that more than 20 elites of the Yulin Royal Guards were killed on that rainy night, and a psyche master in the see-through state lost his life. How could His Majesty let you off so easily under such circumstances? The mocking and angry words of the middle-aged man on the throne continued to ring out, and finally turned into a sigh of exasperation. I created such a gang back then and acted as the eyes and ears of the people for the empire. Took me a lot of effort to hide it for more than 10 years, but in the end I was forced into the open by you guys just because of some petty benefits. From then on, I can no longer play the role I want. Is there anything wrong with me calling you idiots? His Majesty sighed, and the officials sighed. At this time, they all knew that the so-called Fish Dragon Gang was a product of His Majesty's whim when he was still the Crown Prince. They all silently thought that it was just his plaything. How could there be so much to say? At this moment, His Majesty's voice became low and cold, and all the mockery disappeared. He stared at the officials and asked sharply, "The question is, are you really just doing it for those petty interests? I know what you want to do, but how can my wife and daughter be chosen by you idiots who are courting death? You stir up trouble in Chang, and in the name of the Empress and the Princess, but you certainly don't know that my Empress has always been very clear about the relationship between the small gang and the palace, and you was even carried to the Spring Breeze Pavilion by me to play when she was young." At this point in the lecture, the officials in the hall could no longer bear the wave after wave of absurd and cold blows. The legs of the Huaihua general and the Huangmen assistant minister turned soft at the same time. They went from kneeling to sitting up in fear. The emperor looked at the two of them coldly and said, "The duty of the Tang Empire's soldiers is to protect the land and open up new frontiers, not to help gangs fight for territory. What I despise the most is that you didn't even win. In that case, you go to Chongning City and train the soldiers for me. Train them for 3 to 5 years. When you are sure that your soldiers can defeat the gangs in Chang'an City, then come back." Chongning City was located in the southwest of the empire. It was hot in summer and cold in winter. There were many forests and poisonous creatures in the mountains. It had always been regarded as a dangerous place by the Tang Empire's officials. As for defeating the gangs in Chang'an City for 3 to 5 years, everything was said by His Majesty. If he said that you didn't win, then you didn't win. Then how would you come back? With a few words, a big shot of the military ministry was assigned to a miserable place, and it was very likely that he would never be able to return to the central command. It was a harsh punishment. The officials in the hall became more and more frightened. But when the protector heard that his head was still on his neck, he did not hesitate to heavily kowtow twice and repeatedly thanked the emperor. His Majesty was a little tired after scolding them dozens of times today. Looking at these officials who did not dare to talk back, he also felt a little tired. He took a cup of tea from Li Yu and drank 2 sips, then waved his hand to signal. Eunuch Lin flashed out from the side of the imperial couch and slowly opened the bright yellow imperial edict with his skinny hands. He read expressionlessly, "In the 13th year of the Tianqi era, Xing Qingyu, the Minister of Revenue, was ordered to return home to meditate and reflect for 3 months. I will wait for your confession." The so-called defense memorial was just an excuse. His Majesty was giving face to the ministers in the imperial court by letting him take the initiative to resign and return to his hometown. Xing Qingyu kowtowed in response. Thinking that his official career had been cut short because of such a trivial matter because of a gang in Chang'an, his hands that were supporting his body could not help but tremble. As Eunuch Lin read the imperial edict expressionlessly, an assistant minister was imprisoned, and the warehouse of the logistics department of the Ministry of Revenue was cleaned from top to bottom. Several officials of the Chang'an local government were dismissed on the spot. The capital governor was exiled to Tianshui with a gloomy expression, and the assistant minister of the eunuch was handed over to the Department of Justice for trial. The military ministry suffered the heaviest blow. General Xiaohou angrily wrote a letter asking the military ministry to explain to him why his capable subordinate Zhuo was murdered by the military ministry. So His Majesty beheaded 7 people in the military ministry to explain to the important general far away at the border, or rather, to Cao Shaoshu. In the process of reading the imperial edict and demoting the officials involved, His Majesty remained silent and did not say a word, no matter whether the officials kowtowed and bled, cried out for their innocence, or shed tears of gratitude. But when the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel asked for opinions on the replacement of the capital governor, he frowned and thought of a name. Chang, an local government judicial military advisor. Who is that Shangguan? Shangguan Yuyang. The Minister of the Ministry of Personnel said. He glanced at His Majesty's expression and guessed what he was thinking. He coughed twice and continued, "This official has a good evaluation and was a proper imperial examination student. But because of his unsightly appearance, I want an official who can govern the people, not a beauty." The Emperor impatiently waved his hand and said, "Then it is this person." The officials in the Palace of Council were either exiled or retreated. Gradually, only the most important figures were left. The prince, who had been sitting quietly in the chair like a statue, could no longer sit still. He stood up from the chair and walked to the bed. He lifted the front lapel of his royal robe and knelt down with a thud. The royal family of the Tang Empire, or rather, the current emperor, had always attached great importance to family ties. Infighting and strife were rarely seen in the royal palace. The emperor trusted the prince, his only brother, and would never make him lose face in front of the officials. However, the prince knew that the so-called face had to be fought for. If he still wanted to keep his face today, then his brother would lose face. As expected, His Majesty did not ask him to stand up today. Instead, he looked down at his brother's face coldly and observed whether the pain between his brother's eyebrows was real or not. After a long time, under the persuasion of the Empress, His Majesty calmed down a little and said in a cold voice, "Raise your head and look at me." The prince slowly raised his head and looked directly at the soul-stirring eyes on the bed. "Is Wang Jinglu your Minister of Offerings?" "Yes." "Do you think it's a pity that I let him serve in the army?" "I dare not. I let him train with Su Shi. He must have his own benefits." Su Shi was the most famous general in the Tang Empire. Wang Jinglu was known as a genius in cultivation. Under the command of the iron-blooded general, Wang Jinglu's temperament would definitely improve. The prince was slightly startled and quickly thanked the emperor. "There is no need to thank me. At least, you cannot thank me on his behalf." The emperor looked at his brother and said in a cold voice, "It is not easy for the Tang Empire to produce a talent, so I want to protect him. But the talents of the Tang Empire can only serve the Tang Empire. They cannot become your private property. Do you understand?" The words hit his heart. The prince suddenly felt his heart tighten. Sweat seeped out of his back and instantly soaked his royal robe. He did not know how to respond. He could only lower his head again and beg for forgiveness in a humble manner. "These years I have rewarded you with many good things. Recently, the palace treasury has been a little tight. You should make some contributions. I will remember your kindness." "I dare not. Is there anything in this world that you dare not do?" The emperor smiled and said, "As a prince, you actually allowed your steward to open a brothel. If it were not for the fact that Mistress Jian and the empress were close friends in the early years, I don't know how many more years I would have been kept in the dark by you." It was not a sneer. There was no hidden meaning in the words, but the prince felt the invisible pressure suddenly increased. The speed of sweat on his back became faster and faster. He nervously waited for the emperor's next edict, but after waiting for a long time, he did not hear it. He could not help but feel suspicious. The smile on the emperor's face gradually disappeared. He looked at him calmly and said, "This time, I am not willing to punish you heavily. It is not because of anything else, but because the person who watched over the House of Red Sleeves for your steward said something for you that he is absolutely loyal to me." The prince suddenly realized that after Cao Shaoshu went to the House of Red Sleeves that day, the steward had told him about Cui Delu's report. Although he believed that he was loyal to the man on the dragon throne, he did not want his subordinates to say too much. He always felt that it was a little embarrassing. Thinking about it today, it was all thanks to the words of the steward. Since the first year of Tianqi era, the weather in the Tang Empire had been smooth. The court and the people were in harmony. There were only two relatively big cases. One was the Imperial Astronomer incident, and the other was the recent case, which was called the Spring Breeze Pavilion case. In the Spring Breeze Pavilion case, on the surface, more than a dozen officials were demoted and 7 people in the military ministry were beheaded. But secretly, some key people in key positions were purged in advance. However, because those positions were related to the safety of the imperial palace and had a bad influence, the news was tightly blocked. On that rainy spring night, Deputy General Chao Ning of the Yulin Royal Guards welcomed Eunuch Lin in the palace and also welcomed his own death. Chang III, Chang Siwei, Fei VI and Fei Jingwei, who were previously prisoners, directly beheaded them in the rain with the imperial edict written by the emperor. Then they reported that they died suddenly of illness. Also on that rainy spring night, Lu Si, the 5th Lu of the Fish Dragon Gang, rode his horse and spear and killed Chu Rin, the deputy commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion, on the playground of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. He took revenge for being set up 10 years ago and also completed the mission given by the emperor. It was also after this rainy spring night that many people in the upper class of the Tang Empire knew the name of Spring Breeze Pavilion Old Chow. Or it could be said that they began to pay attention to this name. Those people also wanted to know who the masked teenager of the Yueluan kingdom beside him was, but they had no way to ask. Chao Xiaoshu stood by the lake in the imperial garden, quietly looking at the big lake called Leaving Sea. His green robe swayed slightly in the lake wind. When eunuchs and palace maids passed by him, they would humbly step aside to avoid him. Now that people already knew who he was and what kind of future he would have, they did not hide the envy, curiosity and even admiration in their eyes. Chao Xiaoshu seemed to feel nothing. There was no coldness on his face when he killed the people last night, nor the nervousness that a person from Jianghu should have after entering the imperial palace. He looked relaxed and calm. A golden carp jumped up from the Leaving Sea, jumped over the dragon gate that the palace maids weaved with garlands, and then happily fell back into the water. In many people's eyes, Chao Xiaoshu was like a fish jumping into the sea today in Chang'an City. He would be famous and would rise rapidly. But he did not think so. Chapter 68. The biggest turbulence in the Tang Tianqi era was taking place in the Palace of Council. Many officials in various departments were guessing the fate of themselves and their superiors. The lad in the imperial study was looking around excitedly. Chao Xiaoshu, who was standing somewhere in the imperial garden, acted as if he had nothing to do with these things. He stood silently by the shore of the big lake called Lehigh, smiling as he watched the colorful carps leap out of the water and over the dragon gate. Then they happily fell back into the lake, wagging their tails as they begged for food. Occasionally he would sigh. More than 10 years ago, he was a young scholar who entered the capital city to take the entrance exam to the academy but was brought into Chang'an by the current emperor. More than 10 years later, he was a green-robed wanderer who stood in the Chang'an a night after beheading countless people. Standing by the lake, he thought about the past and the road ahead of him. Naturally, he had a different feeling in his heart. He did not feel that the road to success was attractive, but only wanted to return to the old days when he studied hard day and night and focused on Taoism. A soft ring broke the silence by the lake. The beautiful young princess slowly walked over with 2 palace maids. Li Yu's gaze fell on the middle-aged man's green robe, which had been washed a little white. She smiled and half-squatted, saying softly, "Greetings, Uncle Chao." The 4th princess of the Tang dynasty, Li Yu, was doted on by the emperor and admired by the people. Even when she met the prince, she would only call him uncle. How could she call a man so intimately? I dare not. Chao Xiaoshu moved sideways to give way, repeatedly saying that he did not dare. His face was full of fear. However, his body moved slightly, and the wind on the lake moved the corner of his green robe. There was no sense of fear at all, only a sense of alienation and vigilance that kept people thousands of miles away from him. Seeing Chao Xiaoshu's reaction, Li Yu's hands on her waist stiffened slightly. The two palace maids behind her turned pale. However, before they could do anything, Li Yu smiled and answered, "Speaking of which, when my father asked the guards to carry me out of the palace to play, I saw you a few times in the gambling house. However, I was too young at that time and gradually forgot that Uncle Chao had carried your niece before. There is no need to treat me like an outsider today. Your Highness's words really frighten me. How could I dare to call myself the princess's elder?" Chao Xiaoshu responded with a smile. The lake water reflected the sunlight and fell on his handsome face. There was no trace of deliberate humility. He was just carefully guarding the status of a monarch and a subject, not daring to take a step forward. Li Yu had repeatedly expressed her goodwill, but Chao Xiaoshu had repeatedly rejected her. The atmosphere by the lake suddenly became a little tense and even depressing. Li Yu quietly looked at the middle-aged man's face and thought of the anger her father had shown since last night. She was more and more certain that this man was extremely important in her father's heart. She waved her hand to stop the old maidservants beside her from whispering and continued with a smile, "I brought back some barbarian guards from the grassland. I heard that someone asked them about something a few days ago. That person's surname is Chen, and he seems to be your brother?" I, Xiaoshu said, "Chen, ch. He is I." Hearing this answer, Li Yu smiled. She shifted her gaze to the sea-like surface of the lake and looked at the lotus leaves disturbed by the swimming fish. She asked, "Is that lad useful?" "Your Highness, I did not use him. I only asked him to help me." Chao Xiaoshu answered, "It's working together, not using him." "If it's working together, then he is also your brother?" Li Yu turned her head and asked with her brows slightly furrowed. Chao Xiaoshu thought of the fried egg noodles in the old brush pen shop and Ning Kei's answer. He laughed at himself and said, "Someone seems to see the world colder than I do." He looked at Li Yu's brows and said seriously, "Your Highness, he does not want others to know. So please keep this little secret for him." Li Yu was slightly startled and then said sarcastically, "Does that idiot think he can keep this a secret for a long time? Does he think he can hide his identity forever by wearing a black mask and combing his hair in the style of the Yueluan kingdom?" Chao Xiaoshu answered, "He will be admitted to the academy soon, and he will enter the second floor. At that time, he will naturally not have to worry about being plotted against." Li Yu thought of Liu Qingchen's evaluation of Ning Quebec. She frowned and asked, "Why do you all think so highly of him?" Chao Xiaoshu smiled and said, "Because he is worth it." Thinking of the knife light at the entrance of the northern mountain road, the leaping figure among the flames, and the story beside the bonfire, Li Yu's expression unknowingly softened. However, her voice was still cold and sarcastic. "I gave him a chance, but he refused to take it. I thought he was an oddball who did not care about his future, power, and wealth. I did not expect him to choose such a way to appear in Chang'an City because he thought it was not exciting enough. But no matter what, I brought him to Chang'an City, so he is my man." Li Yu looked at Chao Xiaoshu with a faint smile. "Uncle Chao, shouldn't you tell me in advance that you are using my man so cruelly?" The confrontation of words was, after all, a psychological contest. Fourth Princess Li Yu was naturally the most outstanding woman in this aspect among the younger generation. However, in front of Spring Breeze Pavilion old Chao, who was used to seeing bloodshed, she did not have the slightest advantage. Chao Xiaoshu smiled and said, "If he is your man, why would he be so embarrassed over a small shop? and I believe that the princess should also be able to see that the little guy will never be anyone's man. He is only his own man. After several attempts, he did not find the slightest opportunity to take advantage of. He did not even find a gap to talk about business. Liu was silent for a moment. She waved her hand to signal the palace maids and old maidservants behind her to leave. She looked at him with a solemn expression and said, "Uncle Chow." Chow Xiaoshu dodged again and repeated, "This commoner dares not." Liu shook her head and said seriously, "Everyone in the world knows that from today on, Spring Breeze Pavilion Old Chow can no longer be the commoner that father hid among the people. He is no longer just the leader of the first gang in Chang'an. Whether it is the leader of the bodyguards or the ministers, there will definitely be a place for you in the world. When you were Spring Breeze Pavilion Old Chow, those ministers dared to use my or the Empress's name to recruit you and intimidate you. Now that you have jumped out of the sea, do you think that you can stay out of it?" Liu looked at him quietly and said in a sincere and unambiguous tone, "The Empress is a smart person, and I am not stupid. So we will not do anything that father does not like us to do, but we have to do something. I hope that you can support me. When we were young, you held me in your arms. You also held my little brother. You've seen my mother. Could it be that you have the heart to see my little brother lose his throne? Could it be that you have the heart to see my mother in the netherworld's spring filled with unwillingness and sorrow?" The Tang Empire did not care about fighting for the throne. Whoever succeeded the throne was all in the hands of His Majesty. The seemingly cowardly but sober His Majesty would not allow his wife and children to do anything that would harm the country and go beyond his tolerance. However, he wanted to see who would perform better. In this world, in history, there were very few examples as transparent and open as the Tang imperial family. However, what Liu said to Chow Xiaoshu by the lake today still seemed too open and even a little naked. It was extremely out of line with ordinary people's imagination of such palace conspiracies. Chow Xiaoshu was silent for a long time. He looked at her and said in a gentle voice, "Your Highness is really like your mother. You are extremely intelligent and know that any temptation is meaningless to a rough person like me. Instead, it is more appropriate to use a Jianghu tone. However, this is ultimately the Emperor's decision. I am just a small fish in the Tang Empire's sea. Even if I am lucky, I will not be of any use. Uncle Chow, you are too humble. You must know that in all these years, I have never seen my father trust someone so much. Furthermore, he forcefully suppressed the talented exam candidate of the academy in the gutter of the eastern city for so many years. I think my father must feel extremely guilty towards you." Liu looked at him firmly and said, "The most important thing is that you are in the Tang Empire's sea. Even if you jump out of the sea, you will eventually fall back into the sea. One day, you will have to choose which way to swim." Before she could finish her sentence, Chow Xiaoshu smiled and raised his arm to point at the lake. He said, "I'm a small fish, but I don't like to stay in a pond. Even if it's as big as the sea, it's still a pond. So if I have to choose which way to swim, I'll choose to go ashore in the end." Liu frowned and said, "Fish will die of thirst when they go ashore. But before they die, they can breathe enough air." Chow Xiaoshu smiled. "Uncle Chow, you insist that the imperial court is that pond? Can you find a pond bigger than the Tang Empire in the world? Although Jianghu is smaller, it is more relaxed and casual. In comparison, I would rather be far away from Jianghu than stand above the imperial court." Liu frowned and looked at the middle-aged scholar in a green robe by the lake. She suddenly realized that she could not understand some people. She sighed and said, "Jianghu is dangerous." Chow Xiaoshu smiled and said, "But Jianghu is far enough, so there is freedom." Liu shook her head and said, "What kind of freedom can there be?" Chow Xiaoshu looked at her as if he was looking at a junior and said, "The freedom not to choose." Ning Kei's hands were itchy. This was an itch that he had been used to for many years. It had penetrated deep into his bones and blood vessels and could not be removed. He could only endure it. In the quiet and empty imperial study, he walked from the door to the desk, from the desk to the bookshelf, and from the bookshelf to the door. His right hand, which was hidden in his sleeve, kept rubbing his fingers, but he could not stop the itch that came from the deepest part of his body. It itched to see the famous masters on the wall. It itched to see the Hungyen pure silk that was randomly placed. It itched to smell the pine ink of Qinzhou. It itched to touch the fine wrinkles of the bud paper in Xianzhou. It itched even more when his eyes fell on the 5 words written by the emperor: "The fish leaped into the sea." It itched even more. The only way to relieve the itch was to write. However, it was a very stupid choice to use the imperial pen to continue His Majesty's words in the imperial study. He might be heavily punished or even receive a more severe punishment. But it really itched. When Chao Xiaoshu was talking about choice and freedom by the lake, Ning Ke was also going through this painful choice. Tear it up quickly after writing it. Having found a good excuse, Ning Ke shouted happily and rushed to the front of the table. Like a good man eating meat and drinking wine, he melted the ink, grabbed the brush and spread the new paper. The itch that had accumulated in his heart for several breaths was all turned into joy, and with one stroke, he wrote 5 ink characters. The flower blooms on the shore. Chapter 69. Lu Ban wielding an axe in front of his door, Du Kong selling wine in front of his shop, and the headmaster of academy drying books in front of his door were, of course, the most overconfident actions. But if one were to look at it from another perspective, when Lu Ban saw the guy wielding an axe in front of his door, Du Kong saw the guy selling wine in front of his shop, and the headmaster of academy saw the guy drying books in front of his door, especially when they realized that the guy was the most sacred and supreme existence in the secular world, would they feel the same itch as Ning Ke from the bottom of their hearts? I want to be a wooden bird and tell that guy that the prototype of an airplane is like this. I want to brew a pot of wine and tell that guy that the wine of a fallen country is like this. I want to write a few words to tell that guy that this is the soul soup. I want to write a few more words to tell that guy what is called writing. Even if you are the human sovereign or the heaven emperor, you have to listen to me. At this moment, Ning Ke was immersed in this extreme pleasure. He looked at the gradually drying ink on the Xianzhou bud paper with satisfaction. He imagined that he was playing the role of His Majesty's calligraphy teacher, using those brush strokes to slap the old man's palm, and scolding him with disdain and disdain. I wrote wrong again. Stretch out your hand and hit the board. He was very satisfied with the 5 words he had written and even felt that they were the best he had written in recent years. Other than the excellent quality of the brush, ink, paper, and inkstone, and the wonderful location of the imperial study, the most important reason was that he had accumulated too much itch in the room. More importantly, the first 5 words were written by the emperor himself. He admired his round brush with relish and the straight and broad structure. For a moment, he was a little reluctant to destroy the paper. So he was ready to put it into his sleeve after the paper was dry, and quietly take it out of the palace. However, at this moment, an angry roar suddenly sounded outside the imperial study, which had been silent all this time. Where did that bastard go? Ning Ke was shocked. When he looked up, he saw the door of the imperial study being pushed open by a hand. His pupils constricted slightly, and with a quick flick of his finger, the ink paper on the drying table lightly slid into a gap in the corner of the bookshelf. Then, he turned around, folded his sleeves, and pretended to look at the books on the bookshelf. As his sleeves brushed past, the row of books on the bookshelf had already changed directions, and the flowers bloom on the shore was firmly pressed in the innermost area. No one could tell that someone had moved it. The person who walked into the imperial study was a short and strong middle-aged general. He wore a palace bodyguard uniform and had a black gold belt tied around his waist, showing his extremely high rank. The middle-aged general saw Ning Ke beside the bookshelf and the lad who was engrossed in reading like a calligraphy addict. He was so angry that he rolled his eyes and yelled, "Who the hell let you in?" Ning Ke pretended to be absent-minded, but in fact, his ears had been pricking up to listen to the movements behind him. When he heard this, his heart thumped. He guessed that there was some misunderstanding in this matter. It should be that he had misheard something when the little eunuch had told him what to pay attention to. It should not be a conspiracy like the White Tiger Hall. If the palace wanted to deal with a nobody like him, there was no need to do so much. However, the crime of entering the imperial study without an edict could be serious or minor. No matter what, he could not let himself get into such trouble. He was like a cute little scholar who had been dazzled by His Majesty's collection of books. He turned around and rubbed his eyes. He looked at the short and fat bodyguard at the door and said with a face full of confusion, "I have entered the palace by imperial edict. Is there a problem?" The short and fat bodyguard was slightly startled. He had probably never imagined that someone could be so calm and unperturbed after being caught red-handed in the imperial study. He could not help but reveal an inexplicable expression on his face. He painfully covered his forehead with his hand and angrily said to himself, "Old Chow, you bastard! You didn't even teach me the rules in advance." Ning Ke walked out from behind the desk and bowed with his hands folded in front of his chest. He asked in confusion, "General, do you know Brother Chow?" In Lin 47th Street, in Spring Breeze Pavilion, no matter how Chow Xiaoshu had behaved in high spirits, Ning Ke had always refused to acknowledge him as a brother. At this moment, he did not care and naturally said the word brother. It was to protect himself. As for the rhetorical question, it was to turn defense into offense. Anyway, his purpose was to divert the other party's attention from the imperial study to somewhere else. The short and fat bodyguard confirmed that there was no one around the imperial study. He looked at the array in the room with a vigilant and uneasy expression. He did not find anything strange. He covered his forehead again with some lingering fear and looked at Ning Ke in pain. He said, "You rascal, hurry up and come out. I have been looking for you outside for almost an hour. Who would have thought that you would dare to come in here? Remember, you did not come in here today. Don't even think about showing off to others for the rest of your life. Otherwise, I will destroy you." Ning Ke followed the nagging bodyguard out of the imperial study. He took 2 steps to the west and came to the guard duty room in the Spring Harmony Hall not far away. In the dark room, he finally knew that the short and fat, amiable guy in front of him, who spoke with a Hebei accent and whose every word seemed to have the smell of scallions, was actually the deputy commander of the Tang Imperial Bodyguards, Su Chongshan. He was also the person that Chow Xiaoshu had asked him to meet last night. His Majesty is very fond of calligraphy. Coincidentally, you are a seller of calligraphy, so he brought you into the palace with this identity. It was just to avoid people's eyes and ears. But you rascal, actually entered the imperial study without saying a word. Do you really think that you are a master of calligraphy? Do you really think that His Majesty asked you to come and appreciate the calligraphy?" Su Chongshan pointed at Ning Ke's nose angrily and growled in a low voice, spittle flying everywhere. Ning Ke rubbed his nose in embarrassment and thought to himself, "His Majesty did not ask me to come and appreciate the calligraphy, but I have already written something in the imperial study. What can you do to me?" Thinking of this, he thought of the flower blooms on the shore in the corner of the bookshelf. He thought to himself, "How can I take that thing out in the future?" Su Chongshan was a little tired from all the scolding. He supported his thick waist and said, "Let's get down to business." Ning Ke smiled and replied, "Please go ahead." Su Chongshan looked at him strangely and said, "You're such a cheeky young man. You don't look like what old Chow said at all." That's because you are too powerful, Commander. Ning Ke explained very seriously. Anything could be penetrated by mountains of gold and silver, but not by flattery. Even the most immature and clumsy flattery had its uses, not to mention that the one doing it was a seemingly immature and clumsy young man. Su Chongshan's expression became slightly better. He coughed twice and asked, "Now you should know who old Chow works for, right?" Ning Ke frowned slightly and asked, "Is Brother Chow the commander's subordinate? I don't have the guts to order Spring Breeze Pavilion old Chow around. Also, don't call him Brother Chow in the future. Those old people are few and far between now. We are used to calling him Second Brother Chow," Su Chongshan said seriously. Then he thought of the massacre in the spring rain last night and old Chow's evaluation of this young man. He found Ning Ke more pleasing to the eye. He suddenly changed the topic and asked with a smile, "Why did you help old Chow last night?" "I took 500 taels of silver." Ning Ke answered honestly. No one would risk their life for a person they had just met for 500 taels of silver. Moreover, that person was a 16-year-old young man who was about to enter the academy. Su Chongshan did not believe his explanation, so he did not think that Ning Ke was greedy for money. Instead, he thought that Ning Ke was a true man of character. Suddenly, he found Ning Ke more pleasing to the eye. His Majesty likes people of character, and so do I. Su Chongshan looked at him with a smile and asked, "Then I only need to ask one question. That is, are you willing to sacrifice your life, and even your reputation for the Empire?" Ning Ke was slightly stunned. He frowned and thought for a long time. On the one hand, he was trying to guess the real reason why this bigwig would ask such a question. On the other hand, he did not understand why the bigwig would use the word, even, in front of the word reputation. Was reputation more important than life? This question was very big and broad, very serious and sacred, but also very confusing. He thought for a long time. He thought about the previous generals of the city of Wei, the comrades who had gone through thick and thin with him, and the passionate people in Chang'an. He answered seriously and slowly, "If I'm forced, I can sacrifice my life." Speaking of this, he suddenly thought of a scene last night. After Chow Xiaoshu reluctantly put down the bowl of noodle soup, he looked at the gray wall across the shop and talked to himself. So he hesitated and added, "But some things can't be done." Su Chongshan looked at him solemnly. He realized that the young man did not give a powerful answer without hesitation. Instead, he thought about it seriously and even embarrassedly for a long time. Regarding this, the deputy commander was not angry. Instead, he was very appreciative, because he knew that a prudent answer after thinking was more reliable than a hot-blooded and impulsive one. "From now on, you are a member of the Tang Imperial Bodyguard." There were no more questions or tests. It was just a simple conversation. Su Chongshan decided to recruit this young man into the Tang Imperial Bodyguard team. Part of the reason was that Chow Xiaoshu was his guarantor, but more importantly, he really liked the young man's temperament when he answered the questions. So it was Ning Ke's turn to be shocked and speechless. He looked at the matte ebony waist token in his hand, and looked at the identification mark on it. After a long silence, he said blankly, "I became an Imperial bodyguard after a fight?" The Fish Dragon Gang was forced to the light by the idiotic ministers in the Imperial Court. Don't look at me like that. The word idiot was given by His Majesty in a rage last night. So we need to rearrange some people to hide in the dark. Su Chongshan explained coldly, "This is the glory of the Tang Empire. Don't think about rejecting it." "It's not about rejecting it," Ning Ke said helplessly. "The problem is, what does the Imperial Court need me to do? What can I do? Most importantly, I'm about to participate in the Academy entrance exam." Su Chongshan's expression changed slightly when he heard the word, Academy. It was not for any other reason. As an old guard, he knew very well what Chow Xiaoshu had gone through in the past. It was also because of those past events that this batch of secret guards now had the treatment that they did not have in the past. He looked at Ning Ke with a gentle smile and said, "Don't worry. You can enter the academy if you can. After you graduate from the academy, you will still be serving the imperial court. There is no conflict between the two." "You haven't told me what I need to do," Ning Ke insisted. "The Fish Dragon Gang has been exposed, but there is no longer any problem with the Jianghu in Chang'an." Su Chongshan frowned slightly and said, "Your task is very simple. It is to collect information. We will talk about the details later." If Jianghu was no longer a problem, then the biggest problem other than the imperial power was the world of cultivators. Thinking of the fact that he was about to enter the academy and the vague instructions of the deputy commander, Ning Ke naturally thought of a possibility. Was the imperial court going to attack the academy? The guard token in his hand was a little wet from his sweat, but he knew that he could not refuse these things. He only hoped that things would go differently from what he imagined. Chapter 70. If life wanted to do something to you and you could not resist it, then you could only do this and that. If you were not very resistant, then it would be much easier to do this and that. Based on this understanding, Ning Ke quickly got rid of the shock and distress. He scratched his head and looked over Su Chongshan's thick shoulders, through the window of the duty room, and said, "Can I ask another question?" Su Chongshan answered straightforwardly, "I'll answer if I can." "Why me?" Ning Ke asked. Su Chongshan answered, "Old Chow admires you. He thinks that if you are lucky, you will be even more successful than him in the future. Besides, because of what happened last night, Chang San and Qin Chi also think highly of you. According to the rules of the bodyguard office, whether it is a guard in the open or a guard in the dark, the senior's opinion is relatively more important." "Your Excellency," Ning Ke covered his forehead and said, "if so many people know my identity as a guard in the dark, then I would like to know the meaning of the word dark. Do you want me to go back to Lin 47th Street, to light some firecrackers and pull up a few banners to tell the world that I did this?" Of course, Su Chongshan could hear the dissatisfaction and anger in his words. He frowned slightly and explained, "The Tang Empire is a place with rules. Even if the nobles in the palace know your identity, no one would dare to expose you and risk the wrath of His Majesty. As for Chang San and the others, they have already proven their loyalty and reliability." Ning Ke put down his arms and shook his head. "Only time is the only standard to test the truth. They have used more than 10 years to prove it." Su Chongshan said expressionlessly, "But I like what you said. It's a pity that you want to enter the academy, so you can only do it in the dark. Otherwise, based on Old Chow's admiration for you and what he said, I would really want to train you to be my successor. Although I, Su Chongshan, was born in the army and still have some courage, I can't be as carefree as Old Chow. I don't even know who you are, yet I dare to put my life in your hands. After all, the Imperial Bodyguard is related to His Majesty's safety, so the Imperial Bodyguard Office has already investigated your ancestors. It's a pity that the Bodyguard Office only found that you were 7 years old and confirmed that you were an orphan. They couldn't find your ancestors. But we know your performance in the city of Wei, and we like you very much." Su Chongshan stretched out his broad palm and patted Ning Ke's shoulder heavily. He said, "Your military experience and the military achievements you have accumulated over the years are enough to prove your loyalty to His Majesty and the Tang Empire." Ning Ke did not panic when he heard that the bodyguard office had investigated him. He knew that no one in the world knew who he was except for Sang Sang and the dead darky. He slowly fiddled with the slightly damp waist token in his palm. After a moment of silence, he said, "According to what you said before, no one should take the initiative to contact me. So how should I report anything to you? I don't think we'll meet again in the palace, right? I never imagined that this kind of thing could be done in such an open and above-board place. Why not? Su Chongshan said proudly, there's no safer place in the world than the Tang Imperial Palace. Ning Ke sighed and reluctantly accepted the fact. He then raised his head and looked up expectantly. He said, I can't let anyone know about the reward of reputation. Then, when can I meet the Emperor? Su Chongshan looked at him blankly and then burst into laughter. He rubbed his round belly and laughed. You little brat! Do you think that you're entering the palace today to meet the Emperor? Isn't that so? How old are you? 16. What's your surname? Ning. Su Chongshan looked at him and asked seriously, You're not a centenarian and you're not a distant relative of the royal family. Then why are you so thick-skinned? Ning Ke touched his cheeks, which could barely be considered delicate, and shook his head. Su Chongshan sighed and looked at the lad. He shook his head and said, Chang 3 and the others have not seen His Majesty for many years. Then why do you think that you're qualified to meet the Emperor alone? After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said seriously, My handwriting is really good. If His Majesty likes it, he might be reluctant to let me be a bodyguard and directly summon me to the palace to be a reading attendant or something. Su Chongshan stopped smiling and looked at him mockingly. Other than bodyguards, only eunuchs can stay in the palace all year round. Ning Ke's expression froze and he smiled awkwardly. He did not dare to continue this topic. Su Chongshan was the deputy commander of the Tang Imperial Guards and was naturally very busy. Today, he purposely took some time and even more time to summon this lad alone. This was already giving Cao Xiaoshu a lot of face. After the discussion, he naturally chased Ning Ke away without hesitation and rushed back to the side of the Palace of Council to serve. Ning Ke walked out of the empty guard duty room and was worried about how he would get out of the palace. He wondered if he would end up in a spring willow palace like how he had entered the imperial study by mistake. He wondered if he would meet a cold and resentful woman in the palace and something really kept up. Or if he would meet a princess whom he thought was an idiot but still occasionally thought of. Then he saw the little eunuch who had led him into the palace standing beside him like a ghost. Even though he wanted to question the little eunuch for not being clear about what he had told him and causing him to be tempted and frightened by the drugs in the imperial study, he finally kept his mouth shut for safety reasons. He obediently followed the little eunuch through the quiet willow path and the stone gate. He got on the cramped horse carriage and passed through the laundry station towards the outside of the palace. Just as they were about to pass through the palace alley of the laundry station, Ning Ke suddenly felt something and felt a tightness in his chest. He ignored the little eunuch's stern warning look and lifted a corner of the window curtain and looked out with furrowed brows. His gaze passed through the narrow alley, the sounds of clappers and the smell of honey locust in the alley, and fell on the corner of a magnificent palace in the distance. On the eaves of the high blue sky, there were 8 or 9 beasts on the eaves with different expressions. He did not know what these beasts on the eaves were called or what auspicious signs or monsters they were. He stared at them blankly and felt his chest getting tighter and tighter. His heart beat faster and faster as if it was about to break his ribs and jump out. As his heart beat faster, the beasts on the eaves in the distance became clearer and clearer. The lines of the tiles that had been washed by the wind and rain for hundreds of years became more and more lively, as if they would become living creatures in the next moment. He groaned and covered his chest. He could not help but think of that rainy day when he and Sangsang saw the vermilion bird statue of Chang, and for the first time. He stared at the beasts on the eaves in the palace fiercely and his face became paler and paler, but he refused to look away. A very fierce quarrel broke out in the imperial study earlier. Su Chongshan, the deputy commander of the bodyguards, and Eunuch Lin, the deputy director of the inner palace, stood outside the imperial study like 2 statues. No matter what they heard, they did not dare to show any expression on their faces. That was because the two bigwigs had a grandson sitting deep in their hearts. They were scared, confused, and shocked to the extreme. At the same time, they felt that the person in the imperial study was too King brave. The Tang Empire had been in Tianqi for 13 years, and no one had ever seen the emperor so angry. Even after the Spring Breeze Pavilion incident last night, the emperor only slammed the table a few times and scolded 30 or so idiot. But today, in the imperial study, the emperor had smashed several teacups and scolded many dirty words that should never be heard by others. Chao Xiaoshu, if you still don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for teaching you a lesson. How to teach you a lesson? I really don't King know. You're so stupid and stubborn. Why don't you understand the principles of the world? Fine. I'll call you second brother Chao for the last time today. Are you staying or not? The imperial study suddenly became quiet. Su Chongshan and eunuch Lin, who were outside the door, could not help but look at each other. They confirmed that the shock and envy in each other's eyes were no different from their own. They turned their heads again and silently looked at the flowers and trees again. The room was silent for a long time. Then Chao Xiaoshu's calm, gentle, but firm voice sounded. No. A dull and crisp sound was heard. It should be the sound of the Tang Emperor smashing his most precious Huangzhou mud-sinking inkstone. Su Chongshan and eunuch Lin, who were guarding outside the door, could no longer remain silent. Su Chongshan was especially worried that the emperor would make a decision that he would regret in the future. He took 2 steps forward and was ready to knock on the door to admonish the emperor. At this moment, the door of the imperial study was pushed open with a squeak. Chao Xiaoshu, who was dressed in a green robe, stepped over the threshold and walked out. After the door behind him was closed, he turned around and knelt on the ground. He kowtowed 3 times solemnly, as if he was a monarch and his subject. Then, he stood up and smiled at Su Chongshan and eunuch Lin. He left the imperial study and walked out of the palace. There were no eunuchs or palace maids leading the way. He walked alone slowly, as if he was touring a garden. He had been to this palace many times in the past 10 years and was very attached to it. Over the years, he did not enter the palace often and missed it very much. As he walked to the shore of the big lake called Leaving Sea, Chao Xiaoshu looked at the lake quietly with his hands behind his back. He looked at the golden carps swimming happily in the lake. Suddenly, the corners of his lips curled up slightly, revealing a refreshing smile like the sun shining through the shade of willow trees. Wherever his calm and smiling gaze fell, the figures of those merrily swimming golden carps suddenly stiffened, and they actually became completely still. They were like jade fish that were floating in a crystalline green wave, full of vitality, yet completely devoid of business. Chao Xiaoshu murmured, "After being in the confinement for a long time, I returned to nature. Heaven and earth were the confinement, the human was trapped, the heart was the confinement, the body was trapped. Once the confinement of the heart was broken, the confinement of heaven and earth would also be broken." In the imperial study, the golden crown was carelessly thrown into a pile of firewood in the corner. The Tang Emperor stared angrily at the fish leaping across the sea, written by Ling Chen on the table. His face was full of unwillingness and regret. He did not know that in the corner of the bookshelf, someone had secretly added the flower blooms on the shore for him. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked in the direction of the imperial garden through the window. His eyebrows slowly furrowed and then slowly relaxed. Finally, it turned into peace and relief. He said with a faint self-mockery, "Maybe you are really right." In a certain palace, a Taoist priest of about 40 years of age was taking the empress pulse. Suddenly, his eyebrows shot up. His finger rudely scratched the empress's plump wrist, and he turned his head to look behind him in a daze. The empress slightly frowned and wondered why the nation master, who had always been quiet and gentle, would lose his composure like this. The Taoist priest stared blankly and suddenly beat his chest and stamped his feet, howling, "I was wrong, I was really wrong. I should have persuaded His Majesty to let the little tree go earlier, or just let him enter the academy." With the ability of the headmaster of the academy and the little tree's understanding and state of mind, the Tang Empire will definitely have another peerless powerhouse in these years. Maybe we can even fight with the South Jin Kingdom. What a pity, what a pity, it's a pity that it's too late for more than 10 years. In a side alley of the laundry bureau, Ning Ke sat in the horse carriage and stubbornly stared at the beasts on eaves that seemed to be coming to life. His face became paler and his heart beat faster and faster. Suddenly, all the feelings disappeared. In front of the vermilion bird gate of the palace, the middle-aged man looked back at the stone beasts on the eaves of the main hall and laughed loudly. His laughter was unusually free and clear, without any distracting thoughts. The beasts on eaves seemed to understand the meaning of his laughter and returned to peace and serenity. In the midst of his laughter, he walked out of the main gate of the palace in a fluttering indigo robe. From today onwards, Chang-an would have one less leader called Old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion. There would be one more powerhouse in the world who entered the knowing destiny state while watching the fish in the lake. Chapter 71. Returning to Lin 47th Street, Ning Ke pushed open the door of the shop and entered the backyard. He took out the matte ebony waist token and casually threw it on the bed, as if it was a piece of useless firewood. Sang Sang sat on the bed with her 2 cold feet tucked in the warm quilt. She was concentrating on mending his old coat. She glanced at the waist token on the quilt and picked it up curiously. She squinted her eyes and looked at it carefully for a long time under the light from the transparent tiles on the ceiling. She asked, "Young master, what is this?" "The token of an imperial bodyguard. Secret bodyguard, the kind that can't be seen in the light." Ning Ke sat by the table and drank a few mouthfuls of water from the kettle. He felt a little depressed when he thought that he didn't even have a sip of tea when he entered the palace today. Knowing that Ning Ke had an official identity, just as she had predicted last night, Sang Sang squinted her willowy eyes and smiled happily. However, she had always been more direct when it came to matters. "How much salary can I get every month?" Ning Ke was stunned. He put down the teapot in his hand and recalled the previous conversation. He hesitated and said, "At least 40 or 50 taels of silver?" Sang Sang frowned and her tanned face was full of dissatisfaction. She said, "Not as much as I thought." Ning Ke shook his head and chided her with a smile. "Now that we have 2,000 taels of silver, we should be more generous in the future." Upon hearing this, the dissatisfaction on Sang Sang's face disappeared. She looked at him with a smile and waved her little hand. She said, "Young master, after you left, they secretly sent the silver over." Ning Ke was a little confused. He walked straight to the bed and leaned beside the little handmaiden. He asked curiously, "Where did they put it?" Sang Sang looked outside mysteriously and put down the needle hole in her hand. She pinched the 2 corners of the quilt on her waist with her 2 small hands and nervously opened a gap. She slightly raised her chin and motioned for him to look inside. Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and looked into the quilt incredulously. He saw a dense layer of silver beside Sang Sang's slender legs. Even though it was covered by the thick quilt, he could still see the dazzling silver halo in the dim light. He opened his mouth slightly and forcefully suppressed the excitement in his heart. Pretending to be calm, he lectured, "I've told you before, cough cough, to be more generous. It's just 2,000 taels of silver. Look at how excited and nervous you are. I thought it was strange that you were curled up in bed in broad daylight. So it turns out that you were worried about this. Don't you feel anxious about the money?" Sang Sang looked up at him and shook her head firmly, indicating that the silver was not uncomfortable at all. Ning Ke coughed again and rubbed the little handmaiden's head dotingly. He said, 2,000 taels of silver can be covered with a quilt. What will you do when your young master earns 8,000 or 10,000 taels of silver in the future? Spring in Chang'an was very beautiful. Spring rain fell from time to time, giving birth to all the green leaves and tender flowers on the streets and alleys. No matter if you were standing in the doorway or in the pavilion, you could see the colors of life. Lin 47th Street in the eastern city seemed to come alive with the growing spring colors, and gradually became lively. After the Spring Breeze Pavilion incident, the Minister of Revenue was demoted and the entire shipping department was purged. The land requisition that had been bothering for months naturally came to an end. The warehouse of the shipping department on the other side of the wall was dead silent like a big tomb. Although the Fish Dragon gang was forced to step onto the bright stage, they did not forget to clean up the darkness of the whole city. At this time, no one dared to do anything to Chao Xiaoshu Street, not even to look at it. It was originally an excellent location and a quiet place to do business. Now, without the pressure of the government and the deterrence of the underworld, those closed shop doors naturally reopened. Whether it was the new boss who took over or the old boss who bought back the lease at a high price, they all rolled up their sleeves and were ready to take advantage of the warm spring weather to do a good job. Business was a human industry, and what it emphasized was to gather wealth and people. In the past, there was only one shop on Lin 47th Street, and it exuded a sense of decline from the bottom of its bones. Naturally, no one was willing to shop there, and the business was extremely poor. Now that all the shops on the street were open, and it was bustling under the spring trees, people naturally gathered. Compared to the neighboring shops, the old brush pen shop's business was still not very good. But compared to the cold fire and autumn smoke when it first opened, the situation was much better. Sang Sang was very busy every day, but the smile on her little face grew more and more, and she also insisted on not letting the young master hire more helpers. As for Ning Kai, he still had a bit of the rotten aura of a young scholar in his bones. Looking at the bustling scene in front of him and thinking of the cold old days, he increasingly disliked the customers who bought paintings and calligraphy. Now that he had more than 2,000 taels of silver in his hands, he did not care much about the income of the old brush pen shop, so he simply raised the price of the scrolls by a large margin. In his mind, since he was not short of money now, and they were so cheap as to come to his door to buy it, he naturally had to spend more money. Only then would he be worthy of himself, and only then would he be able to vent the resentment from the previous day. However, things always developed beyond his imagination. The price of the old brush pen shop was raised again and again, and finally it was raised to 5 times the price when it first opened, but he did not expect that there would be more and more customers who came to buy paintings. Although the old brush pen shop was still not famous in Chang'an City, it was already a brand in a small area in the eastern city. So this is how it should be played? Holding a small teapot, Ning Kai leaned against the door and looked at the customers in the shop. He happily sipped 2 mouthfuls of tea and listened to the quarrel in the newly opened fake antique shop next to him. He felt that life was really King wonderful. The shop owners on the street did not know that the revival of Lin 47th Street and the abundant profits they could make had something to do with the little boss of the old brush pen shop. They did not know that if Ning Kai had not helped Chao Xiaoshu to kill all the people on that rainy spring night, this street would probably still be as dead as before. Now, in their eyes, the young boss of the old brush pen shop was just a good-for-nothing who did not know how to make money and only knew how to enslave handmaidens. When business was good and money was earned, people would naturally be happy, but it would also easily cause some new problems. Now that business had only been good for 4 or 5 days, the boss of the fake antique shop already had plans to take a concubine. The fierce quarrel today was precisely because of this matter that the boss and his wife were fighting. How dare you think of taking a concubine with your looks? Why can't I? If I say you can't, then you can't. If you push me too hard, I'll complain to the Chang, and local government. Even Her Majesty can't interfere in this matter. Why should the Chang and local government interfere? Even Ning Ke has a little handmaiden, and you kick me out of bed every day. Why can't I, your master, ask for a foot warmer? You want me to warm your feet? Not even a vermilion bird. Unless Ning Ke becomes the emperor. His surname is not Li. How can he be the emperor? Yueluan Kingdom, South Jin Kingdom, Great River Kingdom, as long as it exists in this world, I can be the emperor of any country. Ning Ke held the teapot and sipped happily, listening to the quarrel in the corner with great interest. He secretly praised the people of the Tang Empire for being so brave and open-minded that they even dared to mention the throne in a quarrel between husband and wife. Suddenly, his expression froze and he realized that he was actually mentioned in the quarrel. He could not help but feel annoyed. Just then, the customers in the shop had left. Sang Sang was tidying up the table. He walked in angrily and shouted, "I can't live like this anymore. The two in-laws quarrel, and they dare to use me as an excuse. They even dare to discuss politics. Do they think that I, the imperial bodyguard, am dead? I'll go to the palace tomorrow to report them and kill their whole family." What he said was not false. He had the waist token of a secret guard, and he was responsible for listening to the public opinion of the people for the imperial court. Of course, he could report to his superiors if someone in the marketplace talked about the throne. However, although the laws of the Tang Empire were strict, they were very lenient in governing the people. Such angry words during a quarrel between husband and wife could only make those nobles laugh, not to mention the bodyguard office. Even if he handed the case file to His Majesty, it would only make those nobles laugh. Because of his words, Sang Sang thought of her worries these days. She frowned and asked, "Young master, in the stories you told me when I was young, spies always die miserably. Now that you are a secret guard, will there be any trouble?" Ning Ke put down the teapot and shook his head, saying, "Although it's a shameful waste token, I'm just a nobody. Who would care about my identity? Moreover, if there's trouble in the future, can't I avoid it?" After a short pause, he looked at Sang Sang and explained softly, "There is another reason why I accept this identity. If I really want to investigate those things and kill those people in the future, it will be more convenient to have the identity of an imperial bodyguard." Sang Sang was a little handmaiden who was lazy to think about things. After listening to his explanation, she felt that it was reasonable and stopped thinking about it. She said, "The umbrella, the knife and the coat are ready. Young master, when are you going to kill the second person? How about the knife? Do I need to sharpen it?" Ning Ke asked. Sang Sang answered seriously, "Even if it is to kill pigs, there must be some problems with the knife after killing dozens of pigs. Of course, it needs to be sharpened." The conversation between the master and the handmaiden had always been erratic. If it was not for them, there would definitely be some communication barriers, especially the extremely calm and ordinary expressions on their faces. If it was heard by others, they would never think that they were talking about the bloody matter of killing people in the spring rain and sharpening the knife to kill again. At this moment, a loud voice came from the end of Lin 47th Street. There was a crowd rushing in that direction. Ning Ke curiously walked to the door of the shop and glanced over there. His expression changed slightly. He saw a middle-aged man in a green robe, surrounded and protected by a group of men in green robes and green boots. He was still wearing an elegant green robe and was talking to the shop owners with his hands cupped in front of his chest. There was a gentle smile on his face. From time to time, he cupped his hands in front of his chest and laughed. The gist of it was that he was here to ask the shop owners not to worry about their business, and if there were any problems, they could ask their subordinates to handle it. Following the middle-aged man's instructions, the 5 or 6 men who had been standing behind him silently cupped their hands in front of their chest. The middle-aged man in a green robe would stop in front of each shop for a while and say a few words. He seemed to be very patient. The subordinates around him also walked slowly with him and gradually walked to the end of the street. At the end of the street, there was a shop selling calligraphy and ink called Old Brush Pen Shop. Chapter 72. Old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion owned numerous properties, like the one on Lin 47th Street. He had been acquainted with many ambitious and high-ranking officials in the past. It seemed that if such a person were to leave Chang'an, he would definitely not bid farewell to the shop owners on Lin 47th Street. However, before he left today, he deliberately came to the Lin 47th Street to bid farewell to those shop owners. In the eyes of the upper class of the empire, they would probably think that this middle-aged man wanted to use this street that caused the Spring Breeze Pavilion incident to send a clear warning. Don't mess around after I leave. But Ning Ke knew that this was definitely not the real reason he came to the Lin 47th Street. He wanted to bid farewell to himself, to the partner who had fought side by side in the spring rain and ate noodles with fried egg side by side. It was only because Ning Ke wanted to hide his identity and was now a secret guard of the palace that the middle-aged man would patiently bid farewell to all the shop owners so that no one in Chang'an would notice his existence. Thinking of this, even Ning Ke, who considered himself to be indifferent, could not help but feel warm in his chest. Looking at the approaching crowd and the smiling middle-aged man in a green robe in the middle, he did not know what to do. Arriving at the entrance of the Old Brush Pen Shop, Chow Xiaoshu looked at the lad and the little handmaiden in the shop and smiled slightly. He saluted with hands folded in front and said, "Boss Ning, nice to meet you." Ning Ke looked at the blocked entrance of the shop and the crowd of onlookers outside the crowd. He smiled bitterly and imitated Chow Chongsheng, bowing with his hands folded in front of his chest. "Greetings, second brother Chow." He had heard the words, second brother Chow, from Deputy Commander Su Chongshan. He thought it was intimate and respectful and very appropriate. But unexpectedly, Chow Xiaoshu was slightly startled and then burst into laughter. The imposing men standing behind Chow Xiaoshu all shook their heads and looked at Ning Ke with a bit of good-natured banter. People in Chang'an City called Chow Xiaoshu Old Chow of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, while the brothers in the Fish Dragon Gang called him Grand Master or Big Brother. Few people knew that second brother Chow was called, so Ning Ke had unknowingly exposed himself. "I'm leaving Chang'an City soon, so I brought my brothers to meet you. Boss Ning, if you have any inconveniences in the future, you can go to them. Of course, I believe that as long as Boss Ning is diligent in managing the business, you will surely soar into the clouds. At that time, please don't forget to help these brothers of mine." Chow Xiaoshu looked at him and said with a smile. He pointed his right hand to the few men behind him with an imposing manner and said, "You have already met Chi 4. They are Chang 3, Lu V, Fei 6 and Chen 7. They are all my trusted brothers." Chow Xiaoshu had said this in other shops as well. But when he said it to Ning Ke, he naturally had a hidden meaning. Ning Ke understood, and so did the men at the entrance of the Old Brush Pen Shop. Chang San, Lu Wu, and the others looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. Then they took a step forward and silently saluted Ning Quebec. They knew what had happened on that rainy spring night, and they already had a good impression of Ning Ke, who they had never met. At the same time, they also knew that Chow Xiaoshu had a very high opinion of this lad, but they did not expect it to be so high. There was even a hint of solemnity in his words. Chang Siwei looked at Ning Ke and said gently, "Boss Ning, if there is any inconvenience in the future, I will inevitably come and bother you." After the conversation in the palace last night, Ning Ke now understood that these men in front of him were the secret bodyguards that His Majesty the Tang Emperor had scattered among the people. Now that their identities had been revealed, they might return to the palace in a few days. Naturally, he would not neglect them. But listening to these words, he felt that something was wrong. Chang 3 was cold, Chi 4 was ruthless, Lu Vi was fierce, Fei 6 was fierce, and Chen 7 was dark. These were the evaluations of the generals of the Fish Dragon Gang in Chang'an City. But looking at Chang Siwei's gentle expression, Ning Ke could not associate him with the word cold. He did not expect that this man had already planned to entangle himself with him. Since they wanted to deceive others, Chao Xiaoshu and the others naturally could not stay in the old brush pen shop for too long. They just casually chatted for a while, and then Chao Xiaoshu looked at Ning Ke with a smile and said 2 words. "Let's go." It was another light and gentle spring rain. Many pedestrians did not even bother to wear a conical hat. Ning Ke stood silently at the entrance of Lin 47th Street and looked at the gradually fading figures in the distance. He looked at the back of the middle-aged man in a green robe, who was still carefree and casual, and suddenly felt a little regret in his heart. Brotherhood, of course, needs time to prove it. If I agree to be brothers with you just because you say so, wouldn't it be too embarrassing for me? I originally thought that after a few years, if I was good enough, it would be okay to be brothers with you. But you just left like this, and it still makes me feel very embarrassed. Ning Ke shook his head and sighed. He turned back and held Song Song's little hand and walked into the alley. A few blooming peach blossoms stretched out from above the alley wall, but they were cut into pieces by the spring rain and scattered on the bluestone pavement. The bluestone pavement at the city gate was also scattered with pistils. Beside a wine shop, Chao Xiaoshu and his brothers who had been through life and death with him for many years drank with the peach blossoms in Chang'an City and then bid farewell. The spring rain came one after another, and people who had just met or reunited were either alive or dead. The lad from the city of Wei and his little handmaiden had unknowingly spent their first month in the capital of the empire, and then finally ushered in the most important day of their lives, if all those incidents of life and death were not counted. Today was the opening of the academy. That was right, it was indeed the opening of the academy. On the first day of the opening of the academy, those who could pass the academy entrance examination would become an honorable student of the academy in Chang'an. As for those candidates who failed the academy entrance examination, they had seen the solemn opening ceremony and the true appearance of the academy. Presumably, this memory would become an unforgettable and comforting part of their lives. Ning Ke and Sang Sang got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and began to freshen up for breakfast. The opening of the academy was a big event for the entire Tang Empire and even the whole world. As for the people of Chang'an City, they had been looking forward to it for many days. All kinds of hawkers had opened their business in advance, so the master and handmaiden were lucky enough to eat hot and sour noodle slice soup. Ning Ke kept yawning and rubbed his tired eyes. It was obvious that he did not sleep well last night. Sang Sang had 2 dark circles under her eyes that were darker than the color of her skin. She looked even more nervous than her young master. The Ministry of Rites had a special carriage to pick up candidates, but Ning Ke chose to rent a carriage to go alone because he wanted to take Sang Sang with him. The carriage knew the identity of the customer and did not dare to neglect it. It had been waiting at the entrance of the alley since midnight. So the master and handmaiden left the old brush pen shop and immediately set off for the south. It was fine when they were in the eastern city, but once the carriage entered the southern city, it became difficult to move. At this time, it was dawn and the spacious Vermilion Bird Avenue looked a little gloomy. It was filled with hundreds of horse carriages. The sky was drizzling, and countless wheels were moving on the wet bluestone slabs, and many horses were kicking the rain angrily. The carriages from the Ministry of Rites were the first to pass. The carriages of candidates with the Academy entrance examination certificates were also under the command of the city gate guard. They squeezed out a bloody path and formed a long line along the drum tower towards the Vermilion Bird Gate. Today, the candidates of the Academy in Chang'an City were the most important people. The carriages of the officials from various departments and even the nobles who attended the opening ceremony were squeezed to the side. As for the rich scholars who had bought tickets to watch the fun, they were even pushed to the back of the line. The candidates were more important than the officials and the rich merchants who could bring in taxes for the empire. It seemed unimaginable, but it was the truth. Moreover, looking at the quiet and luxurious carriages and the calm attendants and guards, one could imagine that the opening ceremony of the academy had been like this for countless years. Sitting in the carriage, Ning Ke and Sang Sang lifted the curtain from time to look around. Their slightly nervous and anxious mood gradually calmed down. When the carriage finally drove out of the southern gate of Chang'an City and headed south along the spacious official road towards the lofty mountain in the clouds, he was even in the mood to enjoy the scenery. The spring rain was still pattering down, but the mountain that suddenly rose from the Wei River plain was not affected at all, because the mountain was clear in front of the mountain, and the mountain was above the rain clouds. The light of the rising sun was reflected by the cliff, and the light was sprinkled to the world, which felt very warm. Looking at the mountain in the distance under the sun in the drizzle, Ning Ke suddenly became extremely calm. He did not know why, but he felt that there was something there that attracted him, and there was a smell that he liked. South of Chang'an and under the mountain was the academy. It was the nameless academy that had gone through thousands of years of trials and hardship. It had a longer history than the Tang Empire, and it had trained countless famous ministers for the Tang Empire and the world. It was not mysterious but almost like a god. It was also the place that Ning Ke had to go through all kinds of hardships to enter. The nameless mountain suddenly rose between the plains and the river, and rushed straight to the sky. The nameless academy silently appeared in the mortal world, and stood tall for thousands of years. Dozens of carriages drove to the foot of the mountain, and the laughter in the carriages stopped abruptly. The students who came for the examination did not feel any pressure, but they had to remain silent because of the respect in their hearts. Under the clear light of the morning sun, there was a large area at the foot of the mountain. It was a gentle slope composed of green meadows and hills, undulating like solidified waves. The grass was like a painting, and there were dozens of intertwining and complicated roads in the painting. There were a few flowering trees planted at a certain distance along the road, and in the middle of the meadow, there were groups of flowering trees. They were the color of apricot blossoms or peach blossoms. They were not regular, but they were extremely beautiful on the hillside. Next to the window, Ning Ke and Sang Sang looked at the fairyland on earth, and looked at the black and white buildings of the academy above the grassy slope. They could not help but be a little lost in thought. After a long silence, he looked back at Sang Sang and said very seriously, "I must enter the academy." Sang Sang raised her little face and looked at him worriedly. She said, "Young master, have you finished the few sets of real questions for the academy entrance exam?" Ning Ke was silent for a long time, and after a long time, he said angrily, "Auspicious words. You little kid don't know what auspicious words are." Chapter 73. As they approached the academy and entered the meadow, they found that the pink and tender flowers were not the same. The most blooming apricot flowers were peach blossoms, but peach blossoms were the most numerous. The first peach blossoms hid behind the apricot flowers, looking up at the people who came to disturb their peace, full of shyness. Sang Sang raised her little face and curiously looked out of the window through Ning Ke's shoulder. She looked at the academy that was getting closer and closer, and the mountain behind the academy that was mostly covered by clouds and mist. She found that she did not feel uncomfortable, and her thin willow-shaped eyes squinted with a smile, full of joy. The students waiting for the exam got off the horse carriages one by one and lined up in front of a spacious stone platform under the direction of the officials from the Ministry of Rites and the instructors of the academy. Then they entered the 2 rows of Yenyu verandas to rest. The students waiting for the exam came from different places. Most of them were personally selected by the instructors of the academy in the various counties and villages of the Tang Empire, and the rest were recommended by various departments. Among them, there were more than 70 candidates recommended by the military ministry alone. Although there were so many students sitting in the Yenyu verandas on both sides of the stone platform, it did not seem crowded at all. One could imagine how spacious the place was. Above the stone platform was the main building of the academy, hidden in the light mist of the flowers and trees. However, because the building itself was extremely tall, and the two slanting corridors were like the wings of a phoenix, it did not look like a pretty girl from a humble family. Instead, it gave off an indescribable feeling of freshness and straightforwardness. Ning Ke was not concerned about the appearance of the academy at this time. If he could enter the academy, he would have several years to measure the vastness of the academy with his feet and admire its beauty with his eyes. What he was more concerned about now was that there might be more than 500 candidates waiting in the Yenyu verandas, and the academy would only admit 200. 2 out of 5 was not a very high ratio, so he could not help but feel a little worried. Under the Yenyu porch, the students waiting for the exam were all calm and collected. No one chatted with each other, and no one took out the test papers in their arms to make a final sprint. They were the most outstanding youths in the Tang Empire and even the whole world. Yes, among them, there were officers over 30 who were born in the frontier fortress and had a weather-beaten face, and there were also gifted children who were brought back to Chang and from a despicable village school and had a childish, ignorant, and uneasy look on their faces. Nevertheless, they were all considered youths. No one wanted to show their lack of confidence at this time. Ning Ke's confidence was getting weaker and weaker, and his right hand was slightly trembling. Several times, he was about to reach out to Sang Sang to ask for the test papers in her bag, but he forcibly withdrew his hand. Just as he was about to give up all his dignity and practice what he was best at, a solemn palace music suddenly sounded around the stone platform. The Yulin royal guards arrived, the guards of honor arrived, the officials from various departments arrived, and then the onlookers who bought tickets arrived, the palace guards arrived, the prince arrived, the empress arrived, and his majesty arrived. Thus, the students waiting in the Yenyu verandas stretched their waists, which were slightly sore from sitting for a long time, bowed deeply, and shouted, "Long live your majesty." Then there was no more time to study hard. While Ning Ke was nagging in his heart, he suddenly saw a beautiful, luxuriously dressed girl with a peaceful temperament walking on the stone platform. Who else could it be other than the princess? The fourth princess of the Tang Empire, Li Yu, walked slowly across the stone platform under the protection of eunuchs, maids, and nannies. She walked past the envious and admiring eyes of the young unmarried students in the corridor, and the surprised and uneasy eyes and whispers of the ministers. She walked along the long path, and came to the main room of the academy. She came to the stone balustrade and bowed slightly to His Majesty and Her Majesty, and then quietly stood by the left side of His Majesty. Different from the malicious imagination of the enemies of other countries in the world, and different from the imagination of some conspiracy theorists such as Ning Ke, there was no conflict between the imperial power and the academy within the Tang Empire. Only a few people knew that the current emperor of the Tang Empire had once studied in the academy incognito for 2 years when he was young. After he ascended to the throne, he would come to the academy for a rest no matter how big or small the festivals were. He might even stay in the academy for a whole month in winter. If the imperial power of the Tang Empire was really afraid of or even checked the power of the academy, then the imperial court would not have put on such a big show when the academy opened, and the emperor would not have treated the academy as his second home. The ministers in the court knew the emperor's feelings for the academy, and knew the importance of the opening ceremony of the academy to the emperor. That was why they could not suppress their shock and exclaimed when they saw the fourth princess, Li Yu. They looked at the high balustrade and looked at the girls standing on the left and right of His Majesty, and their feelings were extremely complicated. The fourth princess had returned from the grassland for less than a month, and she had already shown the world how much she was loved. No one knew what Her Majesty, who was standing quietly on the other side of His Majesty, was thinking at this moment. The bell behind the mountain rang crisply. It was the first gathering of the Academy's entrance examination. Hundreds of students waiting in the Yenyu corridor filed out under the direction of the instructors of the Academy. They walked across the flat path under the balustrade of the main building of the Academy and walked into the courtyard. The Emperor of the Tang Empire looked at the handsome students who filed in under his gaze. He could not help but stroke his thin beard and showed a satisfied and happy smile. The fourth princess, Li Yu, saw her father's expression and said with a smile, "Congratulations, father. All the talents in the world have fallen into your hand." The emperor heard this and laughed. He did not think much of it, but did not feel disobedient. Her Majesty did not say anything. She just smiled and looked up at her husband. Her eyes were full of admiration, and her soft right hand gently touched his hand to show encouragement. The emperor looked at his wife and daughter beside him, the ministers on both sides, and countless future pillars of the empire. He could not help but feel a great sense of satisfaction. Suddenly, he felt as if someone was missing from his side. He frowned and asked a minister behind him, "The headmaster still refuses to come?" The minister bowed in fear and said, "The headmaster said that the entrance examination of the Academy is to select talents for His Majesty and the Empire. He does not need to come. He needs to prepare his luggage and will leave in 2 days." The emperor remembered this and his face was full of regret. He was like a child who did a good deed but did not receive praise from his father. He patted the stone balustrade and sighed. "I almost forgot that the headmaster will leave for the Empire earlier than usual this year." He looked back at the looming mountain in the clouds behind the Academy. After a moment of silence, he bowed. In a pavilion by the roadside about 10 miles away from the mountain, a monk and a Taoist were drinking tea and chatting. It was still early in the morning, and no one knew why they were in such a good mood. The monk was about 30 years old. He looked handsome and peaceful, and naturally had a sense of transcendence. He looked at the vertical and horizontal lines on the ground, and then looked up at the mountain and the Academy in the distance. He suddenly said, "I heard that the headmaster is very tall." The Taoist usually looked solemn, but today he seemed very carefree. He reached out his hand and flicked the air lightly. He replied, "The headmaster is, of course, very tall." "How tall? How would a nobody like me know? Even the nation master of the Tang Empire doesn't know?" "You are the younger brother of the Emperor of the Tang Empire, but you also don't know?" Chapter 74. At this time, Ning Ke was staring at a man. He stared very seriously and unscrupulously. He was one of the hundreds of candidates, and the man was standing in front of hundreds of candidates, talking with confidence and composure. Originally, he would receive hundreds of admiring and even scorching gazes, so he was not worried about being discovered by the man. He just stared at him like this, as if he wanted to eat the man into Mo Rui's pupils and swallow the man into Mo Rui's memories. The man was wearing a deep black robe with gold embroidery. He was handsome, with sword-like eyebrows, thin lips and a straight nose. When he smiled, there were a few wrinkles at the corner of his eyes. If he looked mature, he could be said to be in his 40s, or young, he could be said to be in his 30s. In short, he was a very charming man. He was Li Peiyan, the second most powerful man in the Tang Empire, the only brother of His Majesty, and the famous prince. He was also the culprit who took advantage of His Majesty's trip to the Great Lake 13 years ago to join forces with several important departments and General Xiahou to put Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan into prison for treason and execute the entire general's mansion. From escaping from Chang, and in the first year of Tianqi era to returning from the city of Wei this year, Ning Ke had been painfully struggling to survive in the world for 13 years. Not only did his hatred not fade, but because of the blood that burst out from the blade, the pain in his body and spirit, and the self-reproach hidden in the depths of his heart, it became stronger and clearer. There were many people in Chang, and that he had to kill, and Princely Peiyan was undoubtedly the first on the list. And today, in the academy, he saw his target for the first time, so he looked very seriously. He wanted to imprint the handsome and elegant prince's appearance in his mind, remember his eyebrows, his eyes, and the wrinkles at the corner of his eyes when he smiled, and remember the way his thin lips opened when he spoke, and then at some point in the future, he would tear it all apart. Princely Peiyan smiled gently and encouraged like a spring breeze. Young people, you are all the best in the world. Today, you must use all your skills to deal with the academy entrance exam, but you must not be too nervous. After entering the academy, you must study hard. When you finish your studies, there will be countless positions in the Tang Empire waiting for you to bring glory to the empire. Ning Ke stared at him and gently blinked, his eyelashes cutting the spring breeze. Princely Peiyan looked to his left and looked at the candidates who were dressed differently from the Tangs. He opened his arms and laughed. Although you are not from the Tang Empire, the Academy of the Tang Empire has always been impartial in its education. Please do not worry about the fairness of the admission. If you are successful in your studies, the Tang Empire will still wait for your service. Ning Ke stared at him coldly, his pupils as dark as the sun. Concentration could be understood as passion, and hatred could be understood as awe by diluting it with two other emotions. The students waiting for the exam outside the academy looked at the prince who was giving a speech before the exam. It was easy to understand the look in their eyes, so no one noticed Ning Ke's abnormality. Only Sang Sang raised her little face and looked at him worriedly. Then, she quietly reached her hand into his sleeve and gently held his slightly trembling hand. At this moment, an examinee from the Yen Kingdom mustered up his courage and exchanged a few words with the prince of the Tang Empire. No one knew what joke the prince said, but it caused the extremely nervous examinees to burst into laughter. Li Peiyan took the opportunity to laugh and talk about some interesting things, intending to let the crowd relax a little. The examinees were tactful and no longer stood still and solemn like before. Those who should rub their hands, those who should rub their waists, those who should chat idly, and those who should praise praised. The Tang Empire really has a wise king. The prince's virtue is just as the rumors say, like the spring breeze and the sun, making people happy. Virtue. Not all the candidates were flattering the prince, but Ning Ke could not help but frown slightly when he heard all the words around him. Thinking of Li Yu's title of virtuous princess of the Tang Empire, he murmured sarcastically, "Is there anyone who is not virtuous?" "Yes, the porridge is not salty." A candidate beside Ning Ke answered very seriously. It was unknown when the person standing beside Ning Ke was a young man. The young man was wearing a silk gown, with a gold belt and a precious jade pendant hanging on his waist. At first glance, Ning Ke could tell that the young man was from a rich family, and he was Ning Ke's acquaintance. "Chu Yuxian, you are also here for the academy exam?" Ning Ke turned to look at the young man and asked in surprise, "Why didn't you mention it when I went to the building a few days ago?" This young man was the favorite only son of one of the 7 noble families in Eastern City. He was also the person whom Mistress Jian scolded when Ning Ke stepped into the House of Red Sleeves for the first time. This person's name was Wang and his given name was Yu Xian. He was generous and liked to make friends. When they first met, he wanted to treat Ning Ke to a banquet. Unfortunately, things did not go well. Later, when Ning Ke went to the House of Red Sleeves to chat with Dewdrop and the other girls, they met several times and drank a few cups of wine. Chu Yuxian looked straight ahead, squinted at Ning Ke, and said with a painful face, "My old man forced me to take the exam." He said that if I didn't pass the academy entrance examination in Chang'an, the bride's family would be picky when I got married in the future, and they would have to give more betrothal gift. I was really forced by my old man, so I had to come. Ning Kai turned around and looked at the prince, who was talking to the candidates one by one, and said in a low voice, "The time for the initial examination has long passed. How did you pass it?" Chu Yuxian raised his hand and made a 2 sign in front of him. He looked straight ahead and said, "I went through the military ministry." Ning Kai knew that there were more candidates recommended by the military ministry this year than in previous years. He thought that it was because the imperial court was worried about the shortage of young generals in the army, but he did not expect that there were so many inside stories. Thinking of how he had been killing enemies and chopping firewood in the grassland of the frontier fortress for the past few years, he could not help but feel aggrieved. He cursed in a low voice and said with emotion, 2,000 taels of silver. It's only enough to cover half a quilt, but it's enough to buy a place in the academy." Hearing this, Sang, who had been standing quietly on the other side of him, could not help but look up at him and thought, "Young master, you are not happy. Why do you keep talking about that? 2,000 taels of silver? It's not even enough to send off the gatekeeper of the academy. My old man begged and begged for 20,000 taels of silver, and it's just a qualification for the academy entrance examination. There's no guarantee that you can get into the academy." Chu Yuxian looked at him with disdain and said, "There is no government in the Tang Empire that dares to guarantee that you can get into the academy after receiving money. Not to mention those ministers, even His Majesty can't guarantee it. So don't despise me. My old man said that I'm just here to get some experience so that I can get married in the future." While they were chatting, Princely Peiyan, accompanied by the officials and instructors, walked over. He ignored Ning Kai and Chu Yuxian and fixed his eyes on Sang. Looking at this short and thin little girl, he turned around and said to the instructor with a smile, "I didn't expect to see such a young female candidate. She's even 2 years younger than Wang Ying from Lin City, right?" Wang Ying from Lin City was the young candidate who was brought back to Chang'an from the village school by the instructors of the academy. He was under 14 years old and was introduced to the prince by the officials. But they did not expect to see a little girl with a tan face who was even more childish. But judging from her clothes, she was really. "This is my handmaiden." Ning Kai gently bowed and explained. Princely Peiyan knew that he had mistaken her for someone else, and felt a little embarrassed. The officials behind him immediately stared at the instructor of the academy and said, "How can a handmaiden enter the start-of-term ceremony?" The middle-aged instructor of the academy did not seem to feel the anger of the officials at all and replied indifferently, "There is no restriction for handmaidens to enter the academy. This is a ceremony, not an examination. Just don't let her in later." Being rebutted by the instructor, the official could not get angry. After all, no matter how high his status was and how much power he had, it was useless in a place like the academy. The prince laughed at himself and patted on Ning Kai's shoulder. Without saying anything more, he led the officials to move forward. Ning Kai gently bumped Chu Yuxian with his shoulder and looked at the instructor beside Li Peiyan. He whispered and praised, "Xian, this is what it means to be neither bland nor salty. I like the academy more and more." The bell rang for the second time, and it was the last time. The instructor of the academy told them the rules of the examination room expressionlessly. But the students were too nervous to remember because the rules of the academy entrance examination were so loose that they were not forbidden to chat or ask questions, but they were not allowed to tell each other the answers. Stepping on the scattered peach petals on the flagstones, the students in long robes walked up the stairs and entered the classrooms to prepare for the examination. Sang was left standing alone on the stone ground outside. At this moment, a few drops of spring rain fell. She looked up and squinted at the rain. Then she opened the big black umbrella on her back. The content of the Academy entrance examination was similar to that of the imperial examinations of the Tang Empire. There were 6 subjects in total: etiquette, music, archery, driving, calligraphy, and mathematics. The total score was calculated and the students were admitted. In the morning of the Academy entrance examination, there were 3 subjects, namely etiquette, calligraphy, and mathematics. The first one was mathematics, which the Tangs were not good at or were not interested in. It was quiet in the exam hall. The window frames on the wall framed the white walls and pink plum blossoms outside. It was like a peaceful and beautiful pastel painting, creating an environment that was very suitable for the mind to move. However, after receiving the mathematics test papers, the students who were sitting in front of their desks suddenly fell into chaos and sighed in a low voice. How can it be a comprehensive question? Some students pulled their hair in pain. Are we so unlucky? Some students looked pale. Because there was no rule against making noise in the examination room, the students could not help but express their dissatisfaction and sorrow in various ways. In previous years, mathematics was the most difficult question in the Academy entrance examination. It was usually set by a doctor of literature and a professor of general mathematics. Sometimes the students did not even understand what the question was really about. Ning Ke put the brush on the inkstone and took a deep breath of the cool air. Then he opened the paper and saw only one question on it. There were about a dozen words on it. That spring, the headmaster of the academy traveled to another country and found a peach mountain with good wine. He climbed the mountain to enjoy the peaches and wine. He picked flowers and drank wine along the way. At first, he cut a caddy of peach blossoms and drank a pot of wine. Later, he cherished wine, so he cut another caddy of peach blossoms and drank half a pot of wine. Then he cut another caddy of peach blossoms and drank half a pot of wine. Then he cut another caddy of peach blossoms and drank half a pot of wine. Then he reached the top of the mountain and finished his wine. He looked around and asked the students, "How many caddies of peach blossoms and how many bottles of wine have you drunk today?" Chapter 75. Ning Ke was very good at controlling his emotions, or rather, he was good at suppressing his emotions pitifully, turning the dark night into sunshine on his face. He rarely showed the scenes of the distant world. However, today, when he entered the academy and entered the examination room, he looked at the peach blossoms outside the window and listened to the words of comprehensive mathematics. He could not help but think of the bitter life of practicing both arts and sciences in the winter and summer. But it was also because of his bitter life that the question on the ink scroll was not difficult for him. After the answer flashed in his mind, he could not help but sigh in a low voice. Isn't this question 2F** king stupid? It was indeed very stupid because the answer was 2. Ning Ke used his wrist to grind the ink and dipped the brush in the ink. He wrote down his answer very carefully on the paper. The headmaster of the academy drank 2 pots of wine and cut all the peach blossoms on the mountain. In the distant pavilion, the Taoist looked at the black and white chess pieces on the chessboard. His right hand stretched out in the air, and kept plucking, as if he was playing the zither or playing in the spring breeze. Suddenly, his index finger slightly paused. With this movement, a matte black chess piece jumped out of the chess urn beside the chessboard and fell on the chessboard with a clap, right at the intersection of the vertical and horizontal lines. As the leader of the South School of Haotian Taoism and the nation master of the Tang Empire, it was not surprising that Li Qingshan could play such a move easily. What was strange was that he frowned very hard at this time, as if he was a little afraid of the monk opposite him. The monk called himself Huang Yang and was now stationed in the Wanyan Tower Temple in the southern city of Chang'an. It was said that he once went to an unknown place in the wilderness to cultivate the supreme Buddhism. A few years ago, he met the emperor of the Tang Empire by chance and became his sworn brother. Since then, He was known as the younger brother of the emperor of the Tang Empire. However, this monk pursued ascetic cultivation and usually sat in the Wanyan Tower to recite translated sutras and rarely contacted people outside the temple. Monk Huang Yang quietly looked at the chess pieces on the chessboard. His eyelashes slowly blinked, and a white chess piece slowly rose from the chess urn to the chessboard and then fell slowly without making any sound. It was extremely gentle. The white piece landed and sealed off a certain chi hole. He didn't seem to make any movements, but with a slight shift of his gaze, a black piece that had been eaten was moved outside the chessboard. There were already 7 or 8 pieces there. No one dared to disturb the nation master of Tang and the emperor's younger brother when they were playing chess. The little monks and Taoists were far away from the side of the road and did not have the chance to see the two masters playing chess. Otherwise, if they were to see such a marvelous scene, they would definitely be in awe. Li Qingshan looked at the black and white pieces on the chessboard and shook his head. He changed the subject. When His Majesty is in the palace, only one person remains. When His Majesty leaves the palace, there are 2 waiting for him. When did this rule start? Who in this world would dare to do anything to the Tang Emperor? Moreover, His Majesty is going to the academy today. Who would dare to cause trouble in the academy? Huang Yang smiled and looked at him. I don't know. Li Qingshan said in frustration. You should have heard about what happened to Cao Shaoshu, right? It's such a pity. If he could enter the knowing destiny state more than 10 years ago, we wouldn't have to follow His Majesty as bodyguards every day. Huang Yang shook his head. If he hadn't experienced Jianghu for these years and had the lucky chance to see the lake in the palace, who would dare to say that he could enter the knowing destiny state? Li Qingshan shook his head and said, during those years, you must have been chopping firewood in that temple, so you didn't know the specific situation. Cao Shaoshu had the chance to enter the academy. With his talent, he would definitely enter the 2nd floor. If he could enter the 2nd floor, he would be fortunate enough to be enlightened by the headmaster. Then it wouldn't be difficult for him to enter the knowing destiny state. Huang Yang was silent for a long time. He said softly, if he could enter the academy and be enlightened by the headmaster, it would be a blessing indeed. Li Qingshan looked at his clean face and suddenly said with a self-deprecating smile, everyone says that we can never meet, but they don't know that we really can't meet the academy. The monk and the Taoist in the pavilion were the Dharma protectors of the orthodox front gate of Buddhism and the leader of the South School of Haotian Taoism. No matter what they thought, their status meant that they would never step into the academy. Just like today, when the Emperor of Tang led his ministers to attend the opening ceremony of the academy, the 2 most respected supermundane powerhouses of the Tang Empire could only sit quietly in the distance and play chess. When will the headmaster leave? He will leave Chang and after the semester begins. Headmaster, you've worked hard. Huang Yang looked at Li Qingshan quietly and said, I still want to know how tall the headmaster is. After a long silence, Li Qingshan said, my master once said that the headmaster is as tall as several floors. Huang Yang was slightly stunned, and a sincere smile slowly appeared on his face. Then he slightly opened his lips and let out a sigh. The sigh was like the spring breeze passing through the willows, with an indescribable meaning. The 2nd floor is already very tall, but the headmaster is as tall as several floors. That's really tall. After the math test in the morning, Ning Ke, who was complacent and proud before, was suddenly dumbfounded. Song Song's worries were very reasonable. A poor lad who was busy eating hot and sour noodles with fried eggs, chatting with girls at the House of Red Sleeves, killing enemies at the Spring Breeze Pavilion in the rain, and worrying about how much he earned today would not have the time to memorize the academy entrance examination questions. Even if he did, it would be useless. He lived in the deep mountains and grasslands all year round and did not know those things. It was not a problem for him to write the article on the response of the Tao from memory, but it was impossible for him to think about other things. Ning Ke did not intend to be a hero who did not answer the questions. That would be too pretentious, just like the younger brother of the royal master in the separation pavilion outside the academy. Therefore, he changed his pen and carefully filled the 2 papers from beginning to end. As for whether the answers had anything to do with the questions, it was not within his consideration. He only hoped that the instructors of the academy would sympathize with him because of his neat and tidy papers. During the process of answering the questions, he also thought about it carefully, because he knew that his only advantage in these 2 subjects was probably that his handwriting was much better than others. Therefore, from the beginning of the math test, he put all his attention on the pen and ink, and he deliberately used the hairpin-style small regular script, which he was the least familiar with. He did not use the hairpin-style small regular script to hide anything. Well, it was indeed to hide his gender. He wanted the instructors to think that the owner of the paper was a beautiful, idiotic lady from an official's family who was good at writing, so that they would give him some unspeakable marks. The bell rang again, and the written exam was over. Ning Ke walked out of the examination room disinterestedly, spread his hands to Sang Sang, who was full of expectation, and showed an innocent expression. He accompanied Chu Yuxian, who had come to find him, to have lunch prepared by the academy, and then began to prepare for the wushu test in the afternoon. Ning Ke was very confident about the 3 exams in the afternoon. Therefore, facing the eager eyes of the instructors of the academy and the examiners of the Ministry of Rites, as well as the room full of musical instruments, he did not hesitate to give up. "I'm not a musician in the House of Red Sleeves, and I don't know how to play the flute." Thinking of these stupid words angrily, he followed the crowd of candidates to the lawn outside the academy. On the lawn, there were dozens of military horses, and the captain of the military ministry stood beside them, looking at the eager or pale students indifferently. The course of archery was about archery, and the course of driving was free to choose whether to ride a horse or drive a carriage. Of course, Ning Ke chose to ride a horse. He had been dealing with horses and arrows all these years on the grassland of the city of Wei, so he believed that he would not be worse than anyone else. On the lawn in the distance, Sang Sang, who was holding a big black umbrella, clenched her small fist and encouraged him. He smiled, cheered himself up, and walked to the field. When the candidates of the academy entrance examination were about to take the last 3 exams, in a spacious and clear room in the academy, the instructors were gathered around to mark the papers of the 3 exams in the morning. Most of the instructors were white-haired and had experienced such scenes many times, so they were naturally not nervous. They held a teapot and smoked a pipe, leisurely, occasionally dropping ink to mark, and occasionally raising their heads to chat with their peers. An instructor commented on the difficulty of today's papers. This year's academy entrance examinations were set by eldest senior brother. He has a gentle temperament, so naturally it won't be too difficult. If it was still set by second senior brother like last year, who knows if a large number of people would have fainted from crying today? It's fine if it's etiquette and calligraphy, but this question in mathematics is purely a gift. Everyone knows that the headmaster of the academy is a wine addict. A pot of wine is half, and then the other half becomes a drop. Is the headmaster of the academy going to use his sword to cut the drop of wine into half? How can so many candidates get such a simple mathematics question wrong? I really don't know what their brains are made of. An instructor asked curiously. It's not simple, but I'm more concerned about how many pots of wine did the headmaster of the academy drink when he first entered the West Hill Divine Mountain? How many pounds of peach blossoms did he pluck? Someone laughed and said, the headmaster of the academy drank 7 big pots of wine that spring and plucked all the peach blossoms from the West Hill Divine Mountain. But there is a legend that the headmaster of the academy was the one who drank wine, but the one who plucked all the peach blossoms from the West Hill was the youngest uncle who followed the headmaster of the academy. I also think that the headmaster of the academy is more elegant, and the youngest uncle's violent personality is more suitable. At the mention of the youngest uncle, the instructors were silent for a while and then returned to normal. Someone laughed and said, "But the peach trees on the lawn of the academy were planted by the headmaster of the academy himself." Every time the old Taoist priests from the West Hill Haotian Palace came, their faces looked worse than if their mothers had died. I really think the headmaster of the academy is very bad. The instructors in the marking room laughed. Mocking the world's most sacred West Hill Divine Palace was like a daily routine for them, and their laughter was very arrogant. It must be said that the academy in the south of Chang'an was really a wonderful place. The instructors gradually stopped laughing and began to focus on marking the papers. An instructor looked at the ink scroll in his hand and read aloud, "The headmaster of the academy drank 2 pots of wine and plucked all the peach blossoms from the mountain." The answer is correct. I notice that this candidate named Ning K answered the fastest, so he can be ranked A. I have no objection to the A grade, but I have a question. Why did the candidate answer 2 pots of wine instead of 2 pots of wine? Or is this his personal habit? Or is there something special about the 2 words? It's really puzzling. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.